Chapter 2138. As You Wish, Ancestor. The patriarch of the Ling family, Ling Majian, replied politely before ending the conversation with Ling Hogong. Ling Majian made his way out of the room, carefully and cautiously before returning to the room where Jianqin's jade talisman was. The jade talisman Jianqin had given Ling Majian was placed in a jade box enveloped by formations. It sat in the center of the room, quietly. Ling Majian was clearly wary of Jianqin before. He was afraid that Jianqin had done something to the jade talisman, allowing him to observe everything he did. As a result, he did not take the jade talisman with him when he contacted Ling Hogong through a secret technique. However, now that he learned from his conversation with Ling Hogong that the patriarch of the Tian Yuan clan, Jianqin, was a trustworthy person, his wariness plummeted. He made his way to the center of the room and bent down to pick up the jade box. After removing the formations on it, he stowed it away into his space, ring solemnly, preserving it well. At the same time, Ling Hogong sat on a mountain peak with a sword on his back in an independent miniature world. He sighed emotionally as he watched the formations slowly vanish. I never thought that my good friends would cut ties with our Ling family in such a straightforward manner when our Ling family is in such a situation. They're afraid of getting into trouble. Instead, Jianqin, who we've only just met, has come to our Ling family despite the danger of being targeted by the heavenly demon religion. Brother Jianqin, I will remember your kindness. Even though you haven't provided any substantial help to our Ling family, just your kindness is enough. Ling Hogong sighed emotionally. What kindness? Old man Ling, you're already so old, so why are you still talking about love? Hurry up and forge a sword for Bao Bao. At this moment, a golden flying sword flew over from afar and transformed into a little girl with an illusory body. She was very cute and delicate. However, she just happened to have her hands on her hips as she scolded Ling Hogong like she was an old man. Ling Hogong immediately felt cold sweat run down his forehead when he heard the sword spirit say that he was in love. He said, "That's bullshit. Friendship is friendship. What does it have to do with love? Moreover, I'm no longer in the mood for love. What is a little sword spirit like, you know?" The sword spirit's cheeks puffed up from anger. She pointed at Ling Hogong and scolded. "Old man Ling, how dare you say Bao Bao doesn't know? How dare you say Bao Bao doesn't know? Bao Bao's you dare to look down on me? I'll teach you a lesson." The sword immediately controlled the sword. Instantly, the sword energy was like a rainbow. Golden light filled the sky and bloomed with an incomparably dazzling light. Even though the golden flying sword was not controlled by a master, just the presence from the sword spirit was no weaker than an overgod. Ling Hogong's face's face was Ling's Ling, was Ling Hogong was stern. He understood how powerful the sword spirit was, so he did not dare to be careless. He immediately drew the ancient sword on his back and called out, "Chaotic Heaven's sword style!" A streak of resplendent sword light shot out from Ling Hogong's hand toward the sword spirit in a threatening manner. If Jianqin were present, he would definitely discover that Ling Hogong was much more powerful than before. Not only had Ling Hogong successfully broken through from early overgod to mid-overgod, but his comprehension of the laws of the sword as well. Just the chaotic heaven's sword style alone allowed Ling Hogong to look down on mid-overgods. He would even be able to put up a fight against late overgods. Old man Ling, you call that the chaotic heaven's sword style? It's an insult to the name of the chaotic heaven's sword style in your hands. Bao Bao will show you what the true chaotic heaven's sword style is, the sword spirit said disdainfully. Suddenly, an even more powerful and pure sword technique shot out from the golden flying sword. With the appearance of this sword energy, the entire world seemed to darken. This sword technique emitted a boundless radiance that blotted out the sun, moon, and stars, causing the entire world to lose its luster. It was as if this sword technique had become the only thing in the world. When the two strands of the chaotic heavens sword style clashed, Ling Hogong's chaotic heavens sword style seemed to be as fragile as mud, shattering silently. On the other hand, the sword spirit's chaotic heavens sword style was like a streak of light. It surged with sword chi as it shot towards Ling Hogong like it was unstoppable. Whoosh! The sword chi shot past Ling Hogong's head. Although it failed to injure him, it did cut off his hair. At this moment, Ling Hogong seemed to be in a rather sorry state with disheveled hair. His otherworldly bearing had completely vanished. My hair! Why you sword spirit is just too detestable. You've gone too far, Ling Hogong cursed in a rather exasperated manner. He felt extremely gloomy inside. Ling Hogong was renowned in the divine kingdom of Pingtian, where very few people dared to offend him. Yet now he had been bullied to such a state by a sword spirit. Do you see that? This is the true chaotic heavens, sword style. Old man Ling, I'll teach you to say that Bao Bao doesn't understand it again. Humph. The sword spirit appeared with her hands on her hips. She seemed complacent. Why you sword spirit is unreasonable. All you know is to pester me endlessly, Ling Hogong said furiously. The sword spirit's complacent expression vanished in the blink of an eye when she heard that. Her chubby face suddenly sank, and she glared at Ling Hogong furiously with her large, pretty eyes. She complained, "How dare you go against your superior and speak ill of Bao Bao? You even dare to say that Bao Bao is unreasonable and only knows how to pester you endlessly. Am Bao Bao a person like that? Old man Ling, it looks like Bao Bao hasn't left a good enough impression on you. Humph, Bao Bao will definitely teach you a lesson this time so that you will know Bao Bao's power. This time, Bao Bao will shock you deeply and leave behind a deep enough impression in your heart so that you'll tremble in fear when you see Bao Bao in the future." The Divine Kingdom of Three Cauldrons was a similar organization to the Divine Kingdom of Pingtian. It was only separated by the Divine Kingdom of 9 Stars. However, the current Divine Kingdom of Three Cauldrons was no longer as dignified and glorious as before. Flames of war rose up everywhere in its vast territory. Basically, all the provincial cities in the Divine Kingdom had been reduced to ruins. Rivers of blood flowed, and the ground had been dyed red. Several decades ago, the 9th Army of the Heavenly Demon Religion had attacked the Divine Kingdom of Three Cauldrons. In just a few decades, the 9th Army had taken over all the provincial cities in the Divine Kingdom. An army of 100,000 directly approached the royal capital of the Divine Kingdom, surrounding it. Now, the Divine Kingdom of Three Cauldrons, which was basically as powerful as the Divine Kingdom of Pingtian, only had a single royal capital left standing. Even though the 9th Army of the Heavenly Demon Religion only had 100,000 people, it was nothing before the Divine Kingdom of Three Cauldrons, which numbered over 100 million. Chapter 2139. Currently, the remaining forces of the Divine Kingdom of Three Cauldrons were all stationed in the royal capital. They used the powerful formations of the royal capital and the national treasure to fend off the 9th Army of the Heavenly Demon Religion. They temporarily entered a stalemate with the 9th Army of the Heavenly Demon Religion. The remaining forces of the Divine Kingdom of Three Cauldrons, the powerful formations of the royal capital, and the national treasure created an extremely powerful defense. Even though the Heavenly Demon Religion was far more powerful than the Divine Kingdom of Three Cauldrons, they struggled to break through the royal capital in a short amount of time. However, whether it was the 9th Army of the Heavenly Demon Religion or the remaining forces of the Divine Kingdom of Three Cauldrons, they all understood that this stalemate could not be maintained for too long. Against the 9th Army that was far more powerful than the Divine Kingdom of Three Cauldrons, their destruction was only a matter of time. Naturally, news of the battle between the Heavenly Demon Religion and the Divine Kingdom of Three Cauldrons had spread long ago. Even though many organizations hated the Heavenly Demon Religion to the core, the strength of the Heavenly Demon Religion filled everyone with a sense of powerlessness. As a result, Even though the divine kingdom of three cauldrons was surrounded by the heavenly demon religion and had sent out a request for help, no organization came to their aid. This was because the divine kingdom of three cauldrons' opponent this time was the heavenly demon religion that many organizations feared. Even though they could easily fend off the Ninth Army if they worked together, or even destroy the Ninth Army, no one dared to do so. Once the Ninth Army was heavily injured, there was still the Eighth Army, the Seventh Army, and even the First Army that could cause many people to pale in fear. As a result, countless people sympathized with the divine kingdom of three cauldrons' current predicament, but no one dared to interfere. 100 kilometers away from the royal capital of the divine kingdom of three cauldrons, there was an average-sized military camp. Black clouds churned above the camp as demonic aura surged into the sky. Every soldier in this military camp cultivated a very powerful and overbearing demonic cultivation method. Therefore, not only did these soldiers have extraordinary cultivation, but their combat strength was also extremely powerful. It was also because of this that the Ninth Legion was able to utterly defeat the divine kingdom of three cauldrons' army of over 100 million with a mere 100,000 soldiers, forcing them to flee in defeat all the way to the imperial city. There was a majestic divine hall in the center of the camp. It was completely blood-red, as if it had been drenched in blood. Vaguely, it gave off the smell of blood. Just by standing outside the temple, one would feel an incomparable sense of oppression. At this moment, a heavy thud suddenly rang out from the divine hall. Afterwards, a rough, cold voice rang out, "It's been 10 years. It's been 10 whole years. Yet our Ninth Army still hasn't broken through the imperial capital of the divine kingdom of three cauldrons. Are the three of you brainless? Can't you think of a way to take this place as quickly as possible? I've already stared at this shitty city for 10 years. I feel annoyed whenever I look at it now." The person who spoke was a burly man. At that moment, he sat on the commander's seat and glared at the group of generals below him with a fiendish gaze. The man was the commander of the Ninth Army of the heavenly demon religion. He was known as the Blood God's Hand, Yen Wuming. At the same time, he was an extremely powerful divine king realm expert. Facing the enraged regiment commander, the faces of the group of officers sitting below all turned pale. Clearly, they were extremely afraid of this regiment commander. Every one of them felt as if they were sitting on a carpet of needles. Yen Wuming. At this moment, a gloomy voice rang out in the hall. An illusory, extremely handsome young man in white robes appeared out of thin air. This young man had a feminine look on his face. At first glance, he was a handsome man who was hard to describe with words. But at the next moment, he seemed to be a peerless beauty whose looks could cause the downfall of a country. If it were not for the fact that he did not have the symbol of a woman on his chest, many people would have believed him to be a woman. The commander of the Ninth Army of the heavenly demon religion, Yen Wuming, stared at the young man coldly. The viciousness in his eyes did not decrease at all. He smiled and said coldly, and I was wondering who it was that dared to call me by my name. "So it's Protector Zung. Protector Zung, you must not have come all the way to my place with the projection of your soul. You must have come for something as simple as a stroll. If you have something to say, say it quickly. Once you're done, leave my territory as soon as you're done." "Humph, Yen Wuming, how arrogant of you. I am a protector of the heavenly demon religion. I can come and go as I please no matter where the 9 armies are. You have no right to speak to me," Protector Zung said coldly. "I don't have the time to waste with a she-male like you. If you have something to say, say it quickly. Once you're done, leave my territory as soon as you're done," Yen Wuming said impatiently. A vicious light flickered in his eyes. "You." Protector Zung flew into a rage. His face was ashen with anger. He pointed at Yen Wuming angrily. However, seeing Yen Wuming's fearless appearance, Protector Zung did not dare to flare up in the end. Even if he was present in person, he would not be Yen Wuming's opponent, let alone the fact that he was only a projection of his soul. Protector Zeng sucked in a deep breath and forcefully suppressed his anger. He said coldly, "I've only come to ask about one thing. Have you captured the successor of the divine King Duanmu?" "Humph, can't you see that I'm attacking the divine kingdom of Three Cauldrons right now? The divine kingdom of Three Cauldrons has 3 divine kings. Without me here, my 9th army will definitely be wiped out by the 3 divine kings. Where would I have the time to bother with the matter of Duanmu's successor? Moreover, what does Duanmu's successor have to do with me?" Yan Wuming said coldly. Protector Zeng sneered. "Yan Wuming, I won't hide it from you. Vice Leader Huai and is extremely concerned about the divine king, Duanmu. Before long, Vice Leader Huai will emerge from seclusion. Once he learns that the successor of the divine King Duanmu is still in the world, he will become furious. The consequences are not something you can bear." Yan Wuming finally became stern. Clearly, he was still extremely fearful of the vice leader of the heavenly demon religion. "Yan Wuming, I have delivered the message. You can decide how you want to deal with this matter. I will take my leave." Protector Zeng coldly tossed these words before his figure disappeared. Yan Wuming sat on the commander's seat emotionlessly. The light in his eyes flickered, and a while later he ordered one of the generals below, Lu Shan, "Take some people and capture Ling Hogong." Chapter 2140. "Yes, sir." One of the generals below stood up and knelt on one knee. He accepted the order politely. After leaving the divine hall, Lu Shan did not hesitate at all. He immediately summoned his 2 lieutenants. "Commander Lu, what's the matter? Why have you summoned the 2 of us so urgently? Are you preparing to attack the royal capital of the divine kingdom of Three Cauldrons again?" Very soon, 2 burly men in black robes strode over from afar. They radiated with demonic aura. Although they seemed to be strolling leisurely, they could easily cross several hundred or even 1,000 meters with every step they took. It was as if the ground had shrunk to an inch. When they were talking, the 2 of them were still several kilometers away. When they finished speaking, it had only been 2 breaths of time. However, in this short period of time, they had already crossed a distance of several kilometers and appeared in front of Commander Lu Shan, whom they spoke of. "You must have heard about the matter of the divine King Duanmu's successor. Earlier, Protector Zeng sent a sliver of his soul to personally ask about this matter. As a result, the commander has ordered me to go to the divine kingdom of Pingtian and capture Ling Hogong. The 2 of you will come with me," Lu Shan said to the 2 of them. Not only were the 2 of them his lieutenants, but they were also his sworn brothers. "Protector Zeng is personally asking about this matter? Commander Lu, I remember that our regiment commander and Protector Zeng have always been at odds. Why would regiment commander listen to Protector Zeng's words?" Hearing Lu Shan's words, one of the deputy generals said rather puzzledly. Lu Shan became stern. He said sternly, "Vice Leader Huai has emerged from seclusion." The expressions of the 2 lieutenants changed when they heard that. They showed undisguised respect and reverence. "There's no time to lose. Commander Lu, let's set off quickly. However, this kid Ling Hogong is influential. He's actually able to attract Protector Zeng's attention, and our commander has personally ordered us to capture him. With us 3 overgods personally taking action this time. Even if Ling Hogong dies, it'll be worth it." Lu Shan's 2 lieutenants sneered as a vicious light flashed through their eyes. Outside the majestic royal capital of the divine kingdom of Pingtian, many cultivators and caravans would pass through the huge gates of the royal capital every single day on the many tunnels that led in and out of the royal capital. From time to time, it was even possible to see luxurious carriages driven by precious beasts slowly approaching the gates of the royal capital. Without a doubt, the people who possessed the right to use these carriages were all people of great power and influence. However, flying was forbidden when entering the royal capital, no matter how great your background was, even if you came from clans and organizations with overgods. This was a sign of respect for the royal capital. Otherwise, unless you were as powerful as the divine king, you could ignore the rules and directly fly into the royal capital. Take this. This is your medallion to enter the royal capital. Remember that you have to pay 10 low-grade divine crystals for every day you stay in the royal capital, or you'll be captured by the guards of the royal capital. A guard pass a medallion to Jianqin at the gates of the royal capital and warn Jianqin. Jianqin entered the royal capital with the medallion. What dense origin energy! The origin energy here is several times denser than in the Dong'an province. Not only is there a sizable divine crystal mine below the royal capital, but the formations in the royal capital have gathered all the origin energy in a radius of 10 million kilometers. What extravagance! Jianchen walked through the streets of the royal capital as he studied the surroundings with interest. He also observed the layout of the royal capital. His current comprehension of the laws of the sword had reached the level of a late-over god, so his vision was incomparable to the past. With just a single glance, he could see many things that were hidden. The entire royal capital is enveloped by an extremely colossal formation. Every single street and even every single store here is connected to the formation, so the defenses of the royal capital are impregnable. Even if over-gods fight in the royal capital, they won't be able to cause any damage to the structures. This is because the colossal defensive formation has reached the level of the divine king. Only divine kings can get through it. Moreover, apart from the defensive formation, there are also trapping formations and killing formations. With the protection of these formations, even if divine king experts come to make trouble in the royal capital, they'll probably suffer the consequences. Jianqin sighed in amazement from the bottom of his heart. Even he was amazed by the power of the royal capital. He thought that if the formations in the Dong and province were as powerful as this, he would truly have nothing to worry about. At this moment, Jianqin came to a halt. He subconsciously looked at a store that he was about to pass by. The 3 words, "True Sword Pavilion," immediately appeared in Jianqin's eyes. The words were written in a flamboyant style, and a sharp sword qi seemed to surge out from them. The True Sword Pavilion was clearly a store that specialized in selling flying swords. Jianqin hesitated slightly before entering without any hesitation. There were all sorts of flying swords displayed in the True Sword Pavilion. A few people gathered in groups of 2s and 3s in the large shop. They were currently inspecting the flying swords in a gentlemanly manner, sometimes shaking their heads in disappointment and sometimes nodding in praise. A few beautiful women received customers politely with professional smiles. They introduced the flying swords one by one with great patience. A group of people caught the most attention among them. They had basically become the center of attention in the True Sword Pavilion, attracting everyone's gazes. They were 2 women and a young man. One of the women had a face that could cause the downfall of a country. Not only was she devastatingly beautiful, her temperament was extremely outstanding, and there was also an extraordinary aura around her. Her expression was gentle, and she looked gentle and quiet. Just a glance at her would give people a warm feeling in their hearts. The other woman also had an extraordinary appearance, and her expression was filled with an undisguised arrogance. Her slightly curled lips seemed to show that she was a woman with a fierce tongue. As for the young man, he was dressed in luxurious robes. He was extremely handsome, but his face was filled with arrogance. He seemed rather condescending. It was obvious with a single glance that he was a profligate son of an aristocratic clan. The 3 of them were accompanied by a few guards. Even though the guards were only at peak reciprocity, it was possible to tell that the 3 of them were anything but ordinary. At this moment, the young man smiled seductively as he whispered to the gentle-looking woman. His eyes were filled with undisguised adoration. Chapter 2142. Primordial Realm. Huayan snorted coldly. His eyes were extremely cold as he growled, "We need to properly investigate this matter and see just which primordial realm expert is bold enough to oppose our heavenly demon religion like this." If it were a battle between primordial realm experts, it wouldn't be a big deal even if they lost. However, as a primordial realm expert, they actually laid their hands on a divine king. Our heavenly demon religion will never let this matter go. We will definitely pursue this matter to the end. Huayan stared at the divine king sternly when he reached there. He said, "Pingtian, let go of Yashi Lian." The divine king smiled. "Huayan, it looks like Yashi Lian holds quite a high position in your heart from how anxious you are." With that, the divine king could not help but tighten his grip on Yashi Lian's head. Primordial realm laws vaguely condensed as he threatened Huayan. "It's not impossible for me to let go of Yashi Lian, but your heavenly demon religion has to withdraw immediately." "Withdraw? That's impossible," Huayan said coldly. His eyes were extremely cold. In particular, when he looked at Jianqin, there was heavy killing intent. If it were not for the fact that the primordial realm expert behind Jianqin had captured Yashi Lian today, Huayan would never have been forced into such a passive situation. All of this was caused by Jianqin. We can't let go of Jianqin. Let's not even talk about how great of a problem he will become once he matures. Just the matter of Yashi Lian is unforgivable. Huayan was filled with killing intent. At that moment, he was tempted to ignore the divine king's obstruction and directly charge over to kill Jianqin. However, Yashi Lian was in the divine king's hands, so he did not dare to act recklessly. "Since your heavenly demon religion refuses to withdraw, I can only disregard my status and personally kill the commander of the 7th Army of the heavenly demon religion. That way, I can weaken your heavenly demon religion's strength." The divine king's voice became cold. It was filled with determined killing intent. He was a decisive person. Since they could not come to an agreement, he would not spare Yashi Lian's life. "Stop!" Just when the divine king was about to kill Yashi Lian, Vice Leader Huayan suddenly called out. The divine king was emotionless. Powerful primordial realm laws had already gathered around his finger that remained on Yashi Lian's head. "Huayan, have you made up your mind?" Emperor Hirata asked, glaring at Huayan. "Pingtian, I'll tell you the truth. You can't kill Yashi Lian. If you really do, your divine kingdom of Pingtian will be destroyed. This is because Yashi Lian is the direct disciple of one of the 8 elders, the Fox Saint Elder. At the same time, she's his only disciple. You should be able to guess just how great her status in the Fox Saint Elder's heart is," Huayan said sternly. "The Fox Saint Elder?" The divine king frowned. His understanding of the heavenly demon religion was limited to the branch on the cloud plane. However, the Fox Saint Elder had clearly surpassed the branch on the cloud plane. "I never thought she would actually be the Fox Saint Elder's direct disciple. Pingtian, you really can't kill Yashi Lian. This is because once the Fox Saint Elder arrives, no one in the southern region, other than the eternal Blood Sun dynasty, is a match for him in the ancient dynasties." At this moment, an old voice suddenly rang out in the divine king's head. The divine king knew who the voice belonged to. It was a primordial realm ancestor of the imperial family of the Heavenly Moon Empire. He watched over the imperial family and used the powerful senses of the soul of a primordial realm expert to communicate with him from extremely far away. The divine king thought quickly. He said to Huayan, "So what if she's the Fox Saint Elder's direct disciple? Casualties are unavoidable in a battle between 2 armies. If the Fox Saint Elder really is bold enough to come, do you think the Blood Sun Empire will just turn a blind eye to it? It's impossible for me to yield to her for no reason." Huayan's face became uneasy. Only after a very long moment of silence did he say, "Pingtian, it's impossible for us to retreat. However, I can give you 7 days to recuperate as a condition of exchanging for Yashi Lian." Huayan was helpless after being forced into such a situation. Yashi Lian's identity was just too special. If anything happened to her here, he would not be able to bear the consequences. 7 days is too short. A month, the divine king said coldly. 10 days. Huayan said coldly. In the end, the two sides agreed to a ceasefire of half a month. Although half a month was very short, it was a great buffer for the divine kingdom of Pingtian. It allowed them to make more preparations. Whether it was the battle between the overgods or the battle between the divine kings, they all stopped at that moment. The overgods and divine kings on both sides all returned to their respective camps. However, their numbers had decreased drastically compared to before the battle began. Over a third of the overgods had died, and several divine kings had died as well. However, when they saw Jianqin standing beside the divine king, many of them were filled with deep surprise. "Brother, this is fantastic. I knew you'd be fine." Siyu rushed over to Jianqin as soon as possible. Undisguised joy filled her face. At this moment, Siyu was covered in blood. Many wounds had appeared on her body, making her look vicious and terrifying. Behind her, Houston, Ruijin, Honglian, Blackfish, and so on all let out a sigh of relief when they saw Jianqin return safely. They all smiled from the bottom of their hearts. They were all injured to varying degrees. In particular, Blackfish was the most heavily injured. Let's go back first." Jianqin did not exchange too many pleasantries. He vanished from the fortress with them as soon as possible. There was a camp within the fortress. Many divine halls stood at the center of the camp. Every single divine hall represented a large organization. The divine king had set up a divine hall in the divine kingdom of Pingtian as a place for everyone to rest. Jianqin directly entered the divine hall with Siyu and the others. He directly arrived in a secret room and took out the best healing pills he had purchased from the imperial capital of the Xiandao dynasty. "These pills are all of extraordinary quality. Consume them quickly and heal your wounds," Jianqin said to everyone. Sacred Feather and the others did not stand on ceremony. They directly picked up the saint healing pills and swallowed them. They began to recover from their injuries and the overused origin energy. "Brother, someone has taken Sister Mu-Er away," Siyu said. He became rather depressed as soon as he mentioned this. "What? Someone has taken Mu-Er away?" Jianqin was stunned. A shocking light shone from his eyes as a powerful presence radiated from him. "What's going on? Who took Mu-Er away?" "It's a sect called the Taoist Sect of Divine Sound." They explained everything in a few simple sentences. The Skyfire Plane, the Taoist Sect of Divine Sound. Jianqin instead calmed down after learning about what had happened. He murmured softly before raising his head to look at the ceiling of the secret room. His gaze seemed to be able to see through all obstructions and into outer space. He saw the Skyfire Plane that was extremely distant from the Cloud Plane, where he had never even heard of it before. I will come and find you. That day won't be too far away." Jianqin secretly made up his mind. Chapter 2143. This chapter has nothing to do with the contents. Please do not read it. The correct content is and at the same time, the heavenly primogenitor was seated in front of the stage, while the second-generation disciples and third-generation disciples sat quietly below him. He looked at the disciples he had carefully selected. Every one of them had been carefully selected. Perhaps it was because he had been too protective of them that they were basically safe, for the sake of creating a barrier between them and their brothers. However, seeing that his senior and junior brothers had left for the primordial world, he could only rely on himself to control the three factions. He could not let these disciples go overboard. The primordial Lord of Heaven nodded at the white crane child behind him. The white crane boy immediately rang the bell in front of the palace, telling the disciples to be quiet. "Your great Uncle Master, third Uncle Master, and some other untainted universe mighty figures are going to the chaos to meet Shan Yuan and seek opportunities. When he left, he entrusted it to me and asked me to take care of it. Remember, the three sects are one family. You can't find trouble with the Jia sect during this period of time. Otherwise, I will punish you severely." At this moment, a jade talisman flew towards the primordial heavenly Lord. Yuan Shi, Tianzuan, took the jade talisman and couldn't help but laugh. Heavenly Lord Yuan Shi had seen Shan Luo at Golden Ao Island before. In Heavenly Lord Yuan Shi's eyes, that child had good potential and extraordinary background. Tong Tian's intention was to find a backer for Shan Luo so that he would not be bullied by others. It could be seen how much Tong Tian liked Shan Luo. Teacher, I would like to follow Uncle Master and Third Uncle Master to search for opportunities in the chaos. After all, the chaos sacred positions are full, and there will be 2 divine Tao saints. I do not cultivate the divine Tao. I hope you can allow me. Yun Zhongzi stood up from his seat and bowed to primordial Heavenly Lord. You have to think this through. Dangers are everywhere in the primal chaos. Everywhere in the primal chaos, there is a bone. Although there are opportunities, the dangers are even greater. With me here in the Urwilds, there's no need to risk your life in the primal chaos. The primordial Lord of Heaven looked at Yun Zhongxian. This disciple of his was blessed with great fortune. He had survived the investiture of the gods and the other tribulations. It could be said that he had remained untouched by the myriad of tribulations. The primordial Lord of Heaven truly didn't want him to risk his life in the primordial chaos. Teacher, how can we, cultivators of the Tao, be at peace forever? Calamities accompany this opportunity for the sake of pursuing the great Tao. So what if 10,000 calamities befall us? I hope Teacher can grant my wish. Forget it. Since you want to go, then go. I'll give my Panga banner to your 3rd martial uncle. Take this jade scepter with you. Primeval Lord of Heaven handed the jade scepter to Yun Zhongzi and began to explain the Tao. There is no 60-year cycle in the mountains, but a dream could last 1,000 years. 100 years was nothing more than a nap in the eyes of the cultivators. The bell that the Purple Cloud Palace used to summon everyone spread throughout the myriad of worlds once again. Countless mighty figures headed to the Purple Cloud Palace. Basically, there were 100 to 200 people in the Chaos Bell. Hong Jun, who had not moved for 10,000 years, walked out of the Purple Cloud Palace with the half-black and half-purple meditation cushion. Greetings, teacher. Seeing Hong Jun come out, everyone lowered their heads and bowed. Yes, I cast a spell. Through the guidance of fate, I let you find Shan Yuan. After Hong Jun said that, he threw the futon into the chaos. The fate of all things in the world is impermanent. The river of destiny appears. With Hong Jun's words, a river that reached the heavens appeared. Every wave and bubble constantly evolved the life of every person. Due to Hong Jun's suppression, the mighty figures could hardly see the river of destiny. Now that Hong Jun had summoned it, everyone carefully looked at the river of destiny and searched for their destiny. Just as everyone cast their gazes in, the entire river of destiny was shrouded in clouds. Even the divine eyes that could see through the 9 heavens and 9 netherworlds couldn't see through the seemingly thin fog. Everyone knew that Hong Jun was preventing them from seeing their destiny, so they retracted their gazes. The meditation cushion gently swept across the river of destiny, bringing with it wisps of water vapor. A huge purple bubble appeared. There was a huge mountain engraved on it that was completely purple. This was a projection bubble of Shan Yuan. The purple nobility represented Shan Yuan's noble identity. The meditation cushion passed through the steam drum and stopped in the chaos. Destiny traction tracking. Hong Jun looked at the meditation cushion that had passed through the steam drum of the river of destiny. He tapped his finger, and the meditation cushion began to fly into the chaos. You can follow the meditation cushion. This is a hand seal. If you can control the meditation cushion, Hong Jun said indifferently. Then he gave a simple hand seal. After bidding farewell to Hong Jun, everyone began to step onto the road of chaos in the direction of the meditation cushion, searching for the divine tree world that Shan Yuan was in. At that moment, Shan Yuan still didn't know that a group of top mighty figures in the primordial world had gone to the chaos to find him. He also didn't realize that he had been schemed against by the heavenly demon. He kept feeling that he had been angry during this period of time and had a bad temper. This was because a small matter could trigger his nameless anger. Every time he was angry, he felt curious. This might have something to do with him accepting the inheritance of the heavenly demon. In order to not be angry at others and find his pure Tao heart, Shan Yuan had no choice but to come to the chaos alone to evolve his great Tao and purify his Tao heart. He wanted his Tao heart to be spotless and not be tainted by worldly affairs. However, what Shan Yuan didn't know was that when he was alone in the chaos, wisps of demonic aura seeped out from his spiritual sea and enveloped Shan Yuan's entire body. They slowly tried to stimulate the memories hidden in the depths of Shan Yuan, the loneliness in his previous life and the struggle in this life. In his previous life, he hated everything. Because he was weak, he could only pretend to be noble. He hated why he had taken away his parents' lives and let him live alone. He lived a lonely life without a single friend and was forever alone. He envied the children who picked him up from school. But so what? Fate was full of hardships. Hatred was only hidden in the depths of his heart. In this life, although he was born noble, he knew the fate of Jie school after joining it. He didn't dare to tell anyone, afraid that he would anger the heavenly Tao. When the God-conferment tribulation approached, the fear in his heart couldn't be told to others. He originally wanted to hide in the heavens, but he was afraid. He was afraid of losing his friends and his lover. However, even if he knew too much, he couldn't tell his teacher. Sad scenes from his previous life and this life all showed Shan Yuan's hatred. Chapter 2144. If that's the case, I'll be taking this person back, said the Divine King. He was decisive and was about to capture Mu Ku immediately. However, just when the Divine King was about to take action, the ancestor of the Earth Spirit sect suddenly said, Ping Tian, don't you think it's a little unfair for a primordial realm expert like you to take action against a Divine King? The Divine King frowned when he heard that. He said emotionlessly, Sang Tu, what do you mean by that? Do you want Jianqin to take on a Divine King as an overgod? It's rumored that although Jianqin hasn't attempted the Overgod's plaque, he's so powerful that he can take on the supreme Overgods who rank first on the Overgod's plaque. Moreover, not long ago, he had even defeated a God King in the northern region. As a result, it'll be rather fair for Jianqin to fight Mu Ku, the ancestor of the Earth Spirit sect said calmly. Then he looked at the Divine King and continued. Although Mu Ku is a Divine King, he's only an early Divine King, and he's not a Divine King. As a result, if you take action, you'll lose your dignity. Mu Ku, the ancestor of the Earth Spirit sect, looked towards Mu Ku. His face was filled with unquestionable dignity. Ancestor, Elder Mu Ku bowed politely. Mu Ku, on the battlefield between the divine kingdom of Pingtian and the heavenly demon religion. Your disciples disregarded the bigger picture and attacked people from their alliance regardless of the situation. As their master, you don't restrain your disciples properly, allowing them to commit such a great mistake. You can't just resign. You need to give Jianqin an explanation for this, said the ancestor. Yes, ancestor. Mu Ku replied politely. He dared not disobey at all. Jianqin, the explanation I'll give you is for you to fight Mu Ku to the death. What do you think? The ancestor said to Jianqin. Jianqin stood up and stared at the ancestor of the Earth Spirit sect with shining eyes. Not only was there no fear on his face, but there was even some sharpness instead. He said coldly, Since that's the case, let me see just how powerful your Earth Spirit sect's Divine King is. Jianqin glared fiercely at Elder Mu Ku. A powerful sword intent radiated from his body as he coldly said, Mu Ku, come out and fight! Sharpness filled Elder Mu's eyes as well. He said, Old Man would also like to see the supreme prodigy, who is rumored to be ranked first on the Overgod's plaque. I want to see if he's really as powerful as the rumors say, where he can defeat the Divine King as an Overgod. As soon as he finished speaking, Elder Mu Ku walked out of the hall. Mu Ku, you can only lose this battle. You can't win. However, at this moment, the ancestor's voice rang out in Mu Ku's head secretly. The voice came from an infinite prime who had reached the Divine King many years ago. Even the Divine King did not know what it said, let alone the other Divine King elders. Because of that, only Mu Ku was able to hear the voice transmission clearly. Elder Mu Ku immediately stiffened. His expression changed a few times rapidly before returning to normal. He felt sorrowful inside. There were many rings of various sizes in the Earth Spirit sect. They were specially used for disciples to spar. At this moment, Jianqin and Elder Mu Ku faced one another on the largest ring. The entire ring had been enveloped by a barrier personally cast down by the ancestor of the Earth Spirit sect. The barrier was so powerful that it was difficult for the Divine King to get through. It could easily endure the shockwaves from the battle inside. Basically, all the elders of the Earth Spirit sect had gathered around the ring. Even the elders who were in seclusion emerged and came to watch the battle. If it were a battle between a Divine King and a Divine King, the elders would not have paid so much attention to it. However, if it was a battle between a supreme overgod who was said to be first on the overgod's plaque against a Divine King, it would be enough to attract the attention of many Divine Kings. Even primordial realm experts would pay some attention to it. Mu Ku's face was extremely sunken as he stood on the stage. The message from the ancestor of the Earth Spirit sect still echoed in his head. A single sentence from the ancestor had directly ended his life, filling him with despair. I really never thought that not only would my disciples fail to kill Jianqin when I ordered them to attack Jianqin, but they would even be doomed. They would be mercilessly abandoned by the sect. Our disciples have been humiliated. Isn't it the humiliation of our Earth Spirit sect? Old Man's actions were completely for the sake of reclaiming the dignity of the Earth Spirit sect. He didn't want others to use the name of the Earth Spirit sect to make a name for themselves, but in the end he sent himself to his death. Elder Mu sighed inside. At this moment, his heart was filled with indescribable bitterness, but soon afterwards his gaze became extremely cold. A powerful pressure that belonged to the Divine King realm radiated from his body, and the laws turned into divine chains that revolved around him. He stared at Jianqin with shining eyes and thought, Old Man is a Divine King realm expert. Even if I can't win this battle, I can't let Jianqin win so easily. Old Man will still use his full strength in this battle. Elder Mu moved. He wielded a wooden staff as he charged towards Jianqin with surging battle intent. His terrifying cultivation of the Divine King realm surged out from his body, condensing on the wooden staff in his hand in a single instance. With the laws on the level of the Divine King, he stabbed it towards Jianqin with overwhelming force. Elder Mu did not hold back at all. He used his full strength, causing the strike to be extraordinarily powerful. When he struck out with the wooden staff, the terrifying energy within it actually affected the space in the ring, causing it to distort. Outside the ring, the ancestor of the Earth Spirit sect and the Divine King both frowned slightly. The two of them could naturally tell that Mu Ku was using his full strength. They had no idea whether Jianqin could really deal with Mu Ku when he was so powerful. Although it was rumored that Jianqin had defeated a Divine King in the northern region, it was only a rumor in the end. In reality, they had no idea whether the rumor was exaggerated or whether the Divine King was injured or not. As for being able to contend with the supreme overgod who ranked first on the overgod's plaque, that was only used to describe Jianqin's strength. Jianqin had not even attempted the overgod's plaque after all. Just what was his ranking on the overgod's plaque with his true strength? Did he really have the right to contend with the person who ranked first? None of this had been decided yet. Does this Mu Ku want to go against me? The Earth Spirit sect's ancestor's heart sank slightly. Specks of cold light flickered in his deep, ink-black eyes. Jianqin's face did not change at all as he faced Elder Mu Ku's aggressive strike. He wielded the startling rainbow sword and protected himself with light as he stabbed out with composure. The strike was simple and plain, without any extravagance at all. However, the simple strike contained extremely deep mysteries of the laws of the sword, and it was compatible with the laws of the sword, coupled with the powerful and destructive chaotic force. The might of Genshin's strike had completely surpassed the level of overgods. It had barely reached the level of the Divine King. Chapter 2149. Chanlong, you cast down the heavens blockade formation. I'll get through it. We have to hurry up now. We have to collect as many God-tier heavenly resources as possible before those people return to the divine medicinal garden. Genshin said urgently. These God-tier heavenly resources were just far too important to him because they represented a tremendous amount of wealth. They were directly related to his plans to go to the Skyfire Plain and Profound Ice Plain. With the assistance of the Anita Tower, Genshin and the others got through the formations several times faster. They only needed 4 hours to get through the formations that would have taken them 20 hours before. Their method of getting through the formations was very simple. Chanlong would cast down a heavens blockade formation for each god-tier heavenly resource to cut off the energy of the formations. Afterwards, Genshin would smash the formations with the Anita Tower, instantly exhausting 70 or 80% of the formation's energy. Genshin, Kea, and Xiaozhang would work together to constantly attack the formations until they ran out of energy. It's a pity that I can't control every bit of the Anita Tower's power perfectly, so I can't smash it a second time. Otherwise, I could have just used the Anita Tower a few times and smashed through the formation in a single stroke. It would have been much faster. Genshin felt some pity as he looked at the small, damaged tower in his hand that had shrunk to the size of a palm. In the following period of time, Genshin and the others busied themselves collecting god-tier heavenly resources in the divine medicinal garden. They completely forgot about the time. They could basically harvest 5 or more god-tier heavenly resources every single day. So in just a little over a month, they had collected over 100 god-tier heavenly resources of various grades. During this period of time, Kea, Chanlong, and Xiaozhang had to stop several times because they had consumed too much origin energy. They used supreme grade divine crystals to recover their origin energy. Only Genshin consumed his origin energy at an extremely slow rate due to the special chaotic force he cultivated. As a result, he did not consume any energy in the past month. However, he could vaguely sense that the chaotic Niden in his dantian had clearly shrunk compared to before. Sigh, what bad luck. There were so many divine kings, but they actually lost to a mere overgod, allowing that mere overgod to obtain that chaotic prime's legacy. Yeah, I really can't accept this. This is a legacy left behind by a chaotic prime. Even if we can obtain it, it would be good if another divine king could obtain it. I never thought that an overgod would obtain it in the end, but that overgod won't have it easy either. The legacy of a chaotic prime is not that easy to obtain. There are quite a few divine kings outside the legacy. Once she emerges from the legacy, those divine kings will never spare her. Who cares about that? Our talent is limited anyway. The difference between us and those supreme prodigies is just too great. The legacies of chaotic primes are just too insignificant to us. Let's just stay in the divine medicinal garden obediently and obtain a flower of ways so that we can prepare for breaking through to the primordial realm. At this moment, 5 men and women of varying ages walked in from outside as they conversed. They directly arrived in the divine medicinal garden, but soon the 5 of them were stunned. Their gazes all gathered in front of them, all looking in the same direction. There, a small tower that was 10 meters tall was floating in the air. This small pagoda was very dilapidated. Every floor of the 9-story pagoda was covered with sword scars. It was almost destroyed beyond recognition. However, even though the tower was extremely damaged, the presence it gave off was extremely powerful. It made the 5 of them feel extremely pressured and suffocated. Boom! Under the gazes of the 5 of them, the small pagoda smashed into the formation below with a force as vast as a mountain. With a muffled sound, the energy maintaining the formation weakened at an inconceivable rate. Heavens, am I seeing things? Just a single strike from the tower has drained 80% of the formation's energy. The 5 of them were stunned on the spot as they felt the energy flow from the formation. Soon after, they looked towards the small pagoda, their eyes filled with intense heat. A god artifact for destroying formations. That's basically a god artifact for destroying formations. With just this god artifact, the formations protecting the god tier heavenly herbs are basically useless. Over a dozen flowers of ways are gone. Not a single one is left. Have the 4 of them taken them all? The 5 people from the same organization all cried out. They were overjoyed as they stared at Jianqin. The 10-meter-tall tower had already shrunk to the size of a hand. Jianqin held it in his hand. Jianqin turned around with the Anita tower in his hand. He stared at the 5 people who had just entered the garden coldly. Chanlong, Kea, and Xiaozhang stopped destroying the formations as well. They also looked at the 5 people with rather sunken faces. There were 3 men and 2 women. Aside from the woman, who was a mid-divine king, the other 4 were late divine king. It would not be difficult for them to kill all of them with their strength, but they would not be able to stop them from fleeing. The light in the older, middle-aged man's eyes flickered by an undetectable flicker after checking the cultivation of Jianqin's group. He immediately clasped his fist at Jianqin's group and said, "We come from the White Cloud sect on the Skyfar Plane. Greetings." "The Skyfar Plane? You come from the Skyfar Plane?" A smear of surprise immediately appeared in Jianqin's eyes when he heard that. The middle-aged man was surprised by Jianqin's reaction. He smiled. "That's right. We come from the Skyfar Plane. Are you fellows from the Skyfar Plane as well?" "I don't come from the Skyfar Plane. It's just that I have a close relative on the Skyfar Plane," said Jianqin as the light in his eyes flickered. The middle-aged man chuckled aloud. "It looks like we do have some fate with you. Now that the Chaotic Prime's legacy has an owner, the people who have left the divine medicinal garden will return before long. You don't have much time left." At this point, the middle-aged man paused for a moment before continuing. "With your strength, even if you have a formation-breaking magic treasure, the amount of divine herbs you can harvest in the following period of time will be very limited. However, we're willing to help you get through the formations. We just hope that we can get a flower of ways from you." "Sure." After a moment of hesitation, Jianqin agreed in the end. One reason was because they came from the Skyfar Plane, so he wanted to learn some information about the Taoist sect of divine sound from them. The other reason was because he was not completely confident in keeping the 5 of them here. As long as a single one of them managed to escape, it would cause a lot of trouble. Afterwards, with the addition of the 5 divine king from the White Cloud sect, Jianqin and the others got through the formations even faster. The formations that originally required 4 hours were shortened to under an hour. In just a single day, they got through over a dozen formations and obtained over a dozen God-tier heavenly resources. However, due to the addition of outsiders, both Jianqin and Kea remained cautious. They held back the strength they displayed, only unleashing the strength of an early divine king. What a profound formation! It can actually sever the connection between the formations and the world, preventing them from being replenished by the power of the Azure Poseidon Palace. The 5 divine kings from the White Cloud sect also sighed in amazement at Chanlong's formations. However, when they looked at the Anita Tower, their gazes were filled with extremely well-hidden desire and greed. P.S. There's still one more chapter. It will be updated later. At the same time, please listen to Xiaoyao's message. After the daily update, Xiaoyao will notify you through the message. Search Xingxingxiao 110. Chapter 2150. Jianqin, Kea, Xiaozhang and Qianlong did not seem to notice the burning desire in the gazes of the Divine King from the White Cloud sect. They were all focused on getting through the formations and collecting as many God-tier, heavenly resources as possible. During this time, a few people returned to the divine medicinal garden one after another. Without any exception, none of them met a good end. They were all killed by the God Kings of the White Cloud sect, who volunteered to kill them. Ever since the Divine King from the White Cloud sect began working with Jianqin's group, Jianchen and Kea were only responsible for unleashing the battle prowess of a Divine King obediently, exhausting the energy of the formations diligently to deal with the other cultivators who had entered the divine medicinal garden. Naturally, there were a few of the 5 Divine Kings from the White Cloud sect who believed their cultivation to be greater. Eldering, I feel like there's something off about the people called Jianchen. After killing the 2 groups of warriors that had entered the divine medicinal garden, the woman with the weakest cultivation among the 5 Divine Kings of the White Cloud sect sent a sound transmission to the middle-aged man. Eldering was the middle-aged man who had spoken to Jianchen earlier. He was the most powerful elder of the White Cloud sect. If he fought alone, none of the late Divine King elders in the White Cloud sect would be his opponent. As a result, Eldering naturally became the backbone of the 5. Elder Shi, what's wrong? Eldering asked. They were communicating secretly. Aside from the 2 of them, even the other 3 people from the White Cloud sect were unable to hear what they were saying. Eldering, don't you think they're too calm? They don't fear us at all. Even when we killed the Divine King who had entered the divine medicinal garden earlier, their expressions did not change at all, Elder, she said secretly as she studied Jianchen's group. Haha, Elder Shi, you can see that they only know how to break the array formation. From this point alone, you can already see that they are not as calm as they appear to be. The calmness you see in your eyes is just a facade, a reflection of the nervousness in their hearts. Moreover, the 4 of them are only early Divine King. Do you really think they can do anything? Eldering said indifferently. He did not take Jianchen's group seriously at all. But there's no buts. Elder Shi, do you really not have any confidence in us? The 4 of us are late Divine King while you're a mid-Divine King. Do you really think we can't deal with the 4 of them? Eldering interrupted Elder Shi rather impatiently. Elder, she said nothing more. She glanced at Jianchen's group from time to time. She had a vague feeling that Jianchen's group was not faking their calmness. It was as if they really did not take them seriously at all. However, when Elder Shi reached this conclusion, even she found it rather hard to believe. She had already used the secret techniques of the White Cloud sect to observe Jianchen's group. They were indeed only early Divine King. How could 4 early Divine King pose any threat to them? Jianchen had also asked about the situation of the Taoist sect of Divine Sound. However, to his disappointment, their sects were too far away from the Taoist sect of Divine Sound, so their knowledge was extremely limited. Apart from the fact that the Taoist sect of Divine Sound was located in the central region of the Skyfar Plain, they knew nothing else. As the formations were destroyed one by one, Jianchen's group collected more and more heavenly resources. Whenever they collected a new heavenly resource, the hearts of the 5 Divine King from the White Cloud sect would beat faster. They suppressed their deep excitement and passion. It was as if the person collecting the heavenly resources was not Jianchen, but themselves. Another 3 Divine Kings have come. One of them is a late Divine King. At this moment, Elder Ying's face sank slightly. He left Jianchen, Kea, and the others to continue destroying the formations, while the 5 of them directly went up to fight. They had purposefully chosen the only entrance for the battle. They were not afraid that Jianchen's group would take advantage of the chaos to flee. So you've been secretly harvesting heavenly resources here, and you even want to silence me. Don't even think about it. A late Divine King who fought against the elders of the White Cloud sect understood everything in the divine medicinal garden very soon. He bellowed out and did not linger in the battle any longer. He fled as quickly as he could, while paying the price of being heavily injured. "God damn it, we let him escape," the elders of the White Cloud sect said resentfully. The elders of the White Cloud sect said resentfully before killing the 2 other god kings mercilessly. They arrived before Jian Chen with ashen faces. "The news of this place will be leaked very soon. Once others know that we have a large amount of divine-level heavenly treasures in our hands, they will definitely not let us go. They will attack us as a group. We have to leave this place immediately." Eldering said in a deep voice, his expression very ugly. Genshin's group understood the severity of the matter as well. They immediately stopped destroying the formations and stowed away the Inata Tower before leaving with the 5 of them. Chanlong removed the Heavens Blockade Formation as well. Without it, the formation that had lost 80% of its energy immediately began to absorb the energy of the Poseidon Palace to replenish itself. There was a dwelling several 100,000 kilometers away from the divine medicinal garden. The entire dwelling was enveloped by an extremely powerful formation, pulsing with powerful energy. Many godhood cultivators gathered outside the formation, ranging from overgods to divine kings. There were even a few gods among them. "Humph, with so many of us here, I refuse to believe she can take away the Chaotic Prime's legacy. She can only blame her cultivation for being too low. She's only an overgod. Not only will the Chaotic Prime's legacy not bring her any benefits, but it'll even lead to death." The group of divine kings stood guard outside the formation. They spoke sternly as they sneered viciously. They all stared into the dwelling. At the outermost edge of the crowd, there was a little girl of only 15 or 16 years of age. She wore plain clothes and stood gracefully beside a large tree. Her eyes were also closely staring into the cave dwelling. Her expression was filled with nervousness. "Sister Ziyun, you can't let anything happen to you. You can't let anything happen to you. Please don't let anything happen to you. Please don't let anything happen to you." The girl clenched her hands tightly as she constantly prayed inside. She was extremely worried, and her delicate face had become rather pale from fright. Her cultivation was extremely low, only at the mortal realm. She had only just become an Earth Saint Master, let alone the godhood experts gathered here. But even the shockwaves from battles between Origin Realm experts were enough to kill a weak existence like her instantly. It was extremely dangerous for her to stand there. Fortunately, no battles had erupted in the surroundings of the dwelling. At this moment, a blood-soaked divine king flew over with lightning speed. He called out from very far away, "Someone possesses a treasure that specializes in breaking through various formations. They're wantonly collecting god-tier heavenly resources in the divine medicinal garden. A quarter of the entire garden has been emptied out. Not a single flower of ways remains. If you want the heavenly resources, stop them immediately. If you waste any more time, they'll definitely empty out the entire garden." "What? A quarter of the entire garden has been emptied out? Are you serious? There are over 1,000 heavenly resources in the divine medicinal garden. A quarter has been emptied out. Doesn't that mean over 200 heavenly resources have been taken away?" Heavens, when the Azure Poseidon Palace opened in the past, only a few heavenly resources were taken away at most. A quarter has been emptied out all of a sudden. The words of the divine king immediately caused all the divine kings in the surroundings to gasp. Their faces were filled with shock. There were also some people who did not believe him. They doubted him, believing that he had ulterior motives. He was probably connected to the overgod who had obtained the legacy and wanted to draw them away. Chapter 2151. The Godnigma Plain was a rather famous plain among the 49 great plains of the Saints' World because it was where the God clan resided. At the same time, it was their main base. The entire plain was under the rule of the God clan. Even though there were many clans that did not belong to the God clan, they still reigned supreme. This was because the God clan was a peak clan in the Saints' world. When the war god of the God clan was still alive, the God clan was the undisputed greatest clan and organization in the Saints' world. Even though the war god of the God clan was dead now, the God clan remained glorious. This was not only because of the God clan's heritage. More importantly, it was because the war gods of the God clan would appear generation after generation. When the first war god died, the God clan would give birth to a second war god several 100,000 years or even 1,000,000 years later. Who knew how many generations had passed since then? Moreover, there would only be a single war god in each generation. There would never be two war gods at the same time. At this moment, a burly, golden-skinned young man sat in the main seat within a majestic war god hall within the main camp of the god race on the Godnigma plain. Around a dozen people of various ages stood below the young man. They were all respectful. These people of various ages were all members of the upper echelon of the God clan. They possessed great authority. If they were outside, they would be peak experts who could reign over an entire region. However, they all stood politely before the burly young man who was clearly only a divine king. He had not reached the primordial realm yet. If Jianchen were here, he would definitely recognize the young man with a single glance. He was his close friend, whom he had not seen for many years, Tai Ta. Although Tai Ta had not reached the primordial realm yet, his bloodline from the warring gods clearly gave him a lofty status that did not match his strength at all. He had become the king of the God clan, the leader of the God clan. He wielded great authority, where he could make the entire Saints' world tremble with just a stomp of his foot. Reporting to the esteemed war god, the artifact spirit of the Blue Poseidon Palace has awakened. The Poseidon Palace is about to undergo a new master recognition ceremony. I wonder if our god race would like to participate? Below the Iron Tower, a middle-aged man cupped his hands and respectfully said, "Who is the strongest person in the Divine King's realm of the God clan?" Tai Ta asked in a dignified manner as he sat on the highest seat. "Our god race currently occupies 3 spots on the throne of the Divine King, and the strongest is still Aladona. Aladona's body has already recovered. Although she hasn't reached the primordial realm yet, her 3,000,000 years of consolidation in the lower world has made her even more powerful than before," an old man replied politely from below. "Get Aladona to see me. Moreover, all of you are dismissed," said Tai Ta. "Yes, esteemed war god." Everyone in the hall bowed and retreated as soon as possible. In the blink of an eye, only Tai Ta remained seated on the throne. Not long after, a devastatingly beautiful woman in her 20s wearing a woman's long dress walked gracefully to the war god temple with a respectful expression. "Aladona greets the esteemed war god." Aladona knelt on one knee and bowed towards Tai Ta. This woman was the greatest divine king of the God clan, Aladona, who had her body destroyed by Shui Yunlon back on the Tianyuan continent, leaving only her soul behind. Afterwards, she had used her surging life force to transform into the elven god tree. Not only was Aladona the person who received the war god, but she had also waited bitterly for over 3,000,000 years before finally receiving the war god from the lower world to the Saints' world. At the same time, when the Tianyuan continent faced the threat of the crisis of the world, when everyone had basically reached the end of their rope, Aladona had taken action. She had sacrificed 30% of her life force to stop the crisis, buying precious time for Jianchen and the others. In the end, Jianchen had completely destroyed the crisis with the assistance of all the experts from the world of Forsaken Saints. Without any exaggeration, it was all thanks to Aladona that all the living beings on the Tianyuan continent had managed to survive until now. Otherwise, even if Jianchen possessed the primordial god Silk, he would not have been able to completely destroy the evil spirit. The final outcome would have been the destruction of the entire world. Not only the 4 races, but even the world of Forsaken Saints would cease to exist. Now that Aladona had returned to the God clan in the Saints' world, Her body that had been destroyed by Shui Yunlan had recovered as well. Not only had she returned to her peak condition, but her current strength had far exceeded what it had been in the past due to the accumulation of over 3 million years in the lower world. When Taita looked at Aladona, his gaze became gentle. He would never forget how Aladona had helped him back on the Tianyuan continent. Even though Taita had become the supreme king of the god clan and possessed great authority, he still remembered Aladona's kindness. "Aladona, do you still remember my brother from the lower world?" Taita asked Aladona. "Are you referring to Genshin, your majesty? That person's talent is unprecedented. His talent is supreme. So, of course, I remember him," Aladona replied. She could not help but sigh in amazement when she thought of Genshin from the Tianyuan continent. It would not be an exaggeration to describe Genshin's talent as unprecedented. As the greatest divine king of the god clan, Aladona, who had seen many supreme prodigies in the saints' world, felt admiration. Tai Ta's eyes were filled with reminiscence. He said, "Genshin and I are brothers who have gone through thick and thin together. It's just that after coming to the saints' world, I lost all contact with Genshin, so I don't know any news about him. However, with my brother's talent and ability, even if he hasn't come to the saints' world yet, he'll probably come soon. Perhaps he's already somewhere in the saints' world. Aladona, you're the only person in the god clan who has seen my brother, so I'll leave the mission of finding him to you," Taita said sternly. "Your Majesty, if you want to know where Genshin is, why don't you ask the Hall Elders to divine where Genshin is? With their abilities, it won't be too difficult to divine where Genshin is," Aladona said. Hall Elders were also figures of great authority in the god clan. Every single one of them possessed extremely terrifying cultivation. They were people who stood at the apex of the god clan. Taita shook his head. "There's no need to trouble the Hall Elders. I'm worried that they'll divine even more information. Aladona, go find Genshin personally. Do this alone and don't take anyone else with you. Don't tell anyone about the 2 swords on Genshin either." Taita paused there before continuing. "I also know that the saints' world is vast. Finding my brother's whereabouts is thousands of times more difficult than finding a needle in a haystack. However, now that the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace has awakened, the prodigies of various places will gather in the Tsang Poseidon Palace. You can go to the Tsang Poseidon Palace first to befriend them and use their power to find my brother. You need to let them all know that Genshin is an esteemed guest of our god clan. With the reputation of our god clan, I think they'll take care of my brother when they come across him in the future. As for the secret of the 2 swords on my brother, you can tell from what he told me in the lower world. My brother also knows that the 2 swords are connected to great things, so he should keep it a secret. Of course, if you discover that the news of the 2 swords has been leaked, you have to kill everyone who knows about it before it spreads." Taita warned Aladona seriously. Yes, Aladona knows what to do. Aladona left with the orders. She left the god Nigma plane with the great responsibility of the current queen of the god clan, embarking on a journey to find Genshin. Due to Taita's orders, Aladona set off alone. She did not take anyone with her. Otherwise, with her status as the greatest divine king of the god clan, she would have a large group of guards around her no matter where she went. There might even be primordial realm experts secretly accompanying her. Chapter 2152. The Skyfire Plain was a rather renowned place among the 49 great plains of the Saints' world. Compared to the Cloud Plain, which was also one of the 49 great plains, both in terms of overall strength and reputation, the Skyfire Plain was incomparable to the Cloud Plain. This was because a famed peak expert had once been born on the Skyfire Plain. His cultivation had reached the apex, and he was so powerful that many grand primes in the Saints' world would pale in fright at the mention of him. Not only was she known as one of the most powerful people below Grand Exalts in the past, but her way of music had also reached an unbelievable level. She wielded the renowned zither of the demonic cry and created the two tunes of the demonic and divine. When the two tunes were played, they could play the mysteries of the world and interfere with the workings of the heavenly ways. When the demonic song was played, it could steal the souls of all living things in the world, killing people without a trace. It could control the minds of grand primes, causing their expressions to change. No one knew the name of this supreme expert. They only knew that she came from the Taoist sect of divine sound on the Skyfar plane, and her name was the third ancestor. Her name shook up the saints' world, and she was a peak expert who stood at the apex of the saints' world. It was because of the third ancestor that the Taoist sect of divine sound became the greatest organization on the Skyfar plane. It possessed an extremely great status. However, good times did not last forever. After the third ancestor died over 3 million years ago, the Taoist sect of divine sound lost its right to be the greatest organization on the Skyfar plane. It was replaced by another organization. This was because the glory of the Taoist sect of divine sound was all because of the third ancestor. Without the protection of the third ancestor, the Taoist sect of divine sound was not even close to being the greatest organization on the Skyfar plane with its heritage, let alone remaining as the greatest organization on the Skyfar plane. However, even with that being the case, the Taoist sect of divine sound still possessed a certain status on the Skyfar plane. It was one of the great organizations on the Skyfar plane. In particular, due to the influence of the third ancestor when she was still alive, the Taoist sect of divine sound still received the respect of many peak organizations that stood at the apex of the Skyfar plane, even though they had fallen from their position as the greatest organization. At this moment, within the Taoist sect of divine sound in the central region of the Skyfar plane, there was a beautiful woman in a purple dress. She was so perfect that she seemed like a painting. She sat on the peak of a mountain shrouded in clouds. This woman appeared to be only in her 20s. Not only was her peerless appearance beautiful to the point of suffocation, but her temperament was also otherworldly. At first glance, it was as if she was truly an otherworldly fairy. The woman's enchanting eyes stared unblinkingly at the zither on her knees. Her expression was focused as her slender fingers gently plucked at the strings, producing a celestial melody. This beautiful woman was Shangguan Mu. Due to the zither of the demonic cry, Shangguan Mu stirred up all the upper echelon of the Taoist sect of divine sound as soon as she entered. She had even alarmed the ancestor who had been in seclusion for several 100,000 years. She emerged as soon as possible. This was because the zither of the demonic cry was the life-bound treasure of the third ancestor of the Taoist sect of divine sound. Ever since the third ancestor died, the zither of the demonic cry had vanished. As a result, when Shangguan Mu appeared in the Taoist sect of divine sound with the zither of the demonic cry, all the upper echelon of the Taoist sect of divine sound believed that it was the third ancestor's legacy. With her identity as the successor of the third ancestor, Shangguan Mu enjoyed an extremely special and lofty status in the Taoist sect of divine sound. She had even been personally nurtured by the ancestor of the Taoist sect of divine sound. Her status was only second to the sect master. At this moment, an extremely handsome man in white robes appeared behind Shangguan Mu. He held a jade flute engraved with the image of a dragon and phoenix. The man had arrived silently. He stood a few meters away as he stared at Shangguan Mu's back. Undisguised adoration and infatuation filled his eyes. Afterwards, the man elegantly placed the jade flute by his mouth and played it along with Shangguan Mu's melody. This man clearly had great attainments in music. Once the sound of the jade flute was emitted, it perfectly blended with the sound of the zither. That gentle and pleasing sound directly entered one's heart, causing a comfortable feeling to emerge from the depths of one's heart. The zither and the flute harmonized. Anyone who saw this would think that they were an immortal couple. It was enviable. However, the harmony between the zither and the flute did not continue. The moment the flute sounded, the zither music suddenly stopped. Only the gentle and pleasing sound of the flute slowly spread out and reverberated in the mountain peak. Shangguan Mu, I had already stopped playing. She frowned slightly and said, Senior Kong, why have you come? Shangguan Mu. Er's voice was cold and emotionless. It was filled with a sense of unapproachable coldness. The man was called Jun Kong. His master was one of the 4 ancestors of the Taoist sect of divine sound. His talent was astonishing. Not only was he a dazzling new star in the Taoist sect of divine sound, but he was also a supreme prodigy renowned across the Skyfire Plain. Moreover, Jun Kong had already deeply engraved his name on the Divine King's throne 100 years ago. He was truly a supreme divine king. Jun Kong did not continue playing the flute when he saw Shangguan Mu, or stopped playing. He looked at Shangguan Mu, Er's back gently, and said with a gentle voice, Junior Mu? Why have you suddenly stopped? The scenery here is so elegant, like a paradise. Why don't we play a song together, so that our way of music can make this fairy-like scenery even more charming? I like to be alone. I don't want to be disturbed, so please go back, Senior Kong, Shangguan Mu said coldly without even looking back. Jun Kong did not leave. He stared at Shangguan Mu, Er's back deeply. His gaze was filled with love, but there were also mixed feelings. He sighed gently. Junior Mu? Ever since you came to the Taoist sect of divine sound, I've never seen you smile. You're always sunken, as if you have a lot on your mind. Are you still thinking about that person on the distant cloud plain? Have you not forgotten about him? That's my own matter. There's no need to trouble Senior Kong with it, said Shangguan Mu. Junior Mu? If you really are still thinking about that person, I can only advise you to forget about him as soon as possible. I've just received news that the person called Jianqin on the distant cloud plain has already died. He died to the hands of the heavenly demon religion, having his soul wiped out, said Jun Kong. Shangguan Mu shuddered when she heard that. She could not help but tremble violently. A smear of paleness appeared on her beautiful face. After a moment of silence, she murmured with a trembling voice, Impossible, impossible. It's impossible for him to be dead. This news must be fake. Chapter 2153. It can't be, it can't be. It can't be true. Shangguan Mu shook her head gently. She was completely dejected as undisguised sorrow filled her face. Although she did not really believe Jun Kong's news, she could not help but think about how Jianqin had gone missing during the battle between the divine kingdom of Pingtian and the heavenly demon religion in the southern region of the Cloud Plain. The battle had been extremely intense. Even the peak divine king experts of the divine kingdom of Pingtian had died. If Jianqin had encountered an attack from a divine king with his strength as an overgod, he would have been in danger of dying. Almost instinctively, Shangguan Mu believed that Jianqin had probably gone missing during the battle between the divine kingdom of Pingtian and the heavenly demon religion. Shangguan Mu closed her eyes in pain as heavy sorrow radiated from her. Her emotions seemed to affect the vegetation in the surroundings. The tender grass in the surroundings seemed to have lost its luster at that moment, as if it had become gloomy. Junior Mu, you better forget about that person. Let alone the fact that he's already dead. Even if he's still alive, he's not worthy of you, Jun Kong said gently as he stood beside Shangguan Mu. His eyes were filled with tenderness. He was secretly overjoyed. He had no idea who Jianqin was, nor did he know anything about Jianqin. He had made up the news of Jianqin's death earlier, but he had never thought that it would affect Shangguan Mu, so much that she basically believed it to be true. I never thought that a casual lie would leave behind the seed of Jianqin's death in Junior Mu's heart. I believe that in the future, Jianqin's status in Junior Mu's heart will decrease day by day until it's washed away by time. Yep, I need to strike while the iron is hot and leave behind my image in Junior Mu's heart. Jun Kong was secretly overjoyed. He was already thinking about how he could nurture his relationship with Junior Mu in the coming days so that she would truly have him in her heart. Shangguan Mu beauty was supreme. Her otherworldly bearing was fatal to any regular man. Even Jun Kong, who possessed a great status in the Taoist sect of divine sound and was admired by countless female disciples, was deeply attracted to Shangguan Mu. He had fallen in love with her at first sight. Moreover, Shangguan Mu had gained the initial recognition of the zither of the demonic cry. She would inherit the third ancestor's legacy in the future, which made Jun Kong fall in love with her even more. Suddenly, Shangguan Mu's face froze. Her eyes snapped open, and her sorrow immediately vanished. An enchanting light shone from her enchanting eyes as she murmured, "No, he's not dead. He's not dead. Jianchen is still alive. I can sense something. I can clearly sense that he's somewhere far away." Shangguan Mu's voice was filled with excitement. Jun Kong's face suddenly froze when he heard that. He stared at Shangguan Mu in disbelief. Jun Kong's face immediately became ugly when he saw the excitement and joy on Shangguan Mu's face. Just a moment ago, he had planted a seed of Jianchen's death in Shangguan Mu's heart. He was just waiting for this seed to sprout so that she would completely forget about this person called Jianchen. However, he had never thought that Shangguan Mu would actually sense Jianchen vaguely from her excessive sorrow, immediately exposing his lie. At this moment, Jun Kong only felt like he was cursing inside. He did not know what to feel. So what if he's alive? He's from a different world from us, after all. He's not worthy of Junior Mu at all. And nobody like him probably can't even enter our Taoist sect of divine sound. Jun Kong could not help but say he felt deep jealousy towards the person called Jianchen, as well as hidden hatred. He continued to scoff, let alone the fact that he doesn't have the right to enter the Taoist sect of divine sound. He probably can't even come to the Skyfire plane. The Skyfire plane is nowhere near the cloud plane. Senior Jun Kong, you can look down on everyone in the world, but you can't look down on him. If you really want to talk about it, I should be the one who's not worthy of him, not the other way around. As long as he has time, I believe there's basically nothing he can't do in this world. Shangguan Mu calmed down and said coldly, "He's just a mere overgod. Yet Junior Mu is praising him like that. May I ask if he's managed to leave his name on the overgod's plaque?" The more Shangguan Mu praised Jianchen, the deeper his hatred towards Jianchen became. The ancestor once said that being first on the Divine King's throne doesn't mean that the Divine King is invincible. Being first on the Overgod's plaque doesn't necessarily mean you're first, either, because there are a few extremely impressive prodigies in the saints' world who don't care about fame and have never attempted the Overgod's plaque or the Divine King's throne, said Shangguan Mu. Afterwards, she paused and glanced at Jun Kong slightly before continuing. However, with Jianchen's talent, I believe he'll definitely be able to make it into the top 10 of the Divine King's throne once he reaches the peak of the Divine King's throne. Jun Kong's face sank. He was a supreme Divine King on the Divine King's throne. Although he ranked towards the back, he was proud of this. Now, the Shangguan Mu he had admired for a very long time had described the man she constantly thought about as someone who could make it into the top 10 of the Divine King's throne right in front of him. Was this not a blatant slap to his face? Jun Kong's handsome face had already darkened from anger. Anger swelled in his heart as his hatred for Jianchen reached the limit. It looks like I need to eliminate Jianchen if I want to obtain Junior Mu's person. Jun Kong's eyes were cold as killing intent filled his heart. Jun Kong, Mu! Come see me quickly. At this moment, an obscure voice seemed to cross through time and space, ringing out in Shangguan Mu and Jun Kong's heads. Jun Kong immediately became respectful when he heard the voice, while Shangguan Mu's expression became mixed. She felt gratitude towards the owner of the voice, but she was also displeased. Afterwards, the two of them left, directly arriving in the depths of the Taoist sect of divine sound. They arrived in a forbidden ground that even core disciples could not set foot in. 3 figures sat in the air within a majestic divine hall in the forbidden grounds of the Taoist sect of divine sound. Among the 3 of them, the person in the middle was an old woman in her 70s with a head of white hair, while the other 2 were young men and women who seemed to be in their 30s. At that moment, the 3 of them had concealed their presences, causing them to seem extremely ordinary on the surface. They were like ordinary mortals. Disciple Jun Kong greets Master. Disciple Shangguan Mu greets the 3 ancestors. Shangguan Mu and Jun Kong stood below politely as they bowed towards the 3 of them. The 3 of them were 3 of the 4 ancestors of the Taoist sect of divine sound. They were the peak force of the Taoist sect of divine sound. The 3 ancestors of the Taoist sect of divine sound all looked at Shangguan Mu eagerly. Not only did the 3 of them place great hopes on Shangguan Mu, but even the wind ancestor, who had been in seclusion for a long time in an attempt to break through the final bottleneck, held extremely high hopes as well. This was because Shangguan Mu had already gained the initial recognition of the zither of the demonic cry. If nothing went wrong, she would be the successor chosen by the 3rd ancestor. Mu is the artifact spirit of the zither of the demonic cry showing any signs of awakening? At this moment, the old woman asked. Her gaze was gentle, and her voice was filled with concern. Shangguan Mu shook her head gently. Ancestor, the zither of the demonic cry remains the same. The old woman nodded lightly and said, The zither of the demonic cry is too heavily damaged. Although it looks undamaged from the outside, the artifact spirit has fallen into a deep slumber. It will not be easy to awaken the artifact spirit. Moreover, even if the artifact spirit awakens, it will be difficult for it to return to its peak condition in a short amount of time. Chapter 2154. The young man, who seemed to be in his 30s, said, Our Taoist sect of divine sound was once renowned throughout the saints' world because of the 3rd ancestor. However, after the 3rd ancestor's death, our Taoist sect of divine sound declined. Our current status is not even 10 or 20% of what it was in the past. Mu, your appearance has brought hope to our Taoist sect of divine sound, allowing us to see the day when our Taoist sect of divine sound becomes renowned in the saints' world again. All of this is because you have obtained the 3rd ancestor's legacy. However, if you want to inherit the 3rd ancestor's legacy completely, the artifact spirit of the zither of the demonic cry needs to be awakened. Then you can inherit the 3rd ancestor's legacy completely from the artifact spirit. As a result, awakening the artifact spirit of the zither of the demonic cry is of utmost importance to both you and the entire Taoist sect of divine sound. The man sighed gently when he reached there. He said helplessly, It's just that our Taoist sect of divine sound doesn't have anything that can awaken the artifact spirit of the zither of the demonic cry. The only method we can think of right now is to go to the Tsang Poseidon Palace. Mu'er, the 3rd ancestor of the Tsang Poseidon Palace, the woman who seemed to be in her 30s, looked at Shangguan Mu and said, The Tsang Poseidon Palace opens once every 10,000 years, and right now, it just happens to be when the Tsang Poseidon Palace opens. Originally, we planned on taking you to the Tsang Poseidon Palace the next time it opens. We believe that with your talent and the full support of our Taoist sect of divine sound, we'll be able to raise your strength to the level of the Divine King within 10,000 years. You'll have no worries in the Tsang Poseidon Palace. However, plans can't keep up with changes. Now that the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace has awakened, the Tsang Poseidon Palace is about to choose a new master. As a result, this might be the last time the Tsang Poseidon Palace opens. You can't miss this opportunity. Ancestor, do you want me to go to the Tsang Poseidon Palace right now? Shangguan Mu asked. That's right. The Neptunian Divine Palace only opens for a very short amount of time each time. In order for you to make it in time, you need to use a teleportation formation that can take you across planes, Jianqin said. Afterwards, she said to the other two ancestors, Lian Qi, Guna, the two of you should know just how important Mu is to our Taoist sect of divine sound. I'll leave the two of you to escort her to the Tsang Poseidon Palace this time. Moreover, the opening of the Tsang Poseidon Palace this time will be different from the past. There will definitely be many supreme prodigies in there. Although Mu has already reached the level of the Divine King under the nurturing of our Taoist sect of divine sound, there's still a huge difference between her and those supreme prodigies. As a result, we'll need Jun Kong to be responsible for Mu's safety in there. Jun Kong immediately beamed with joy when he heard that. He said in a hurry, Please don't worry, Master and Ancestor. I'll definitely do my best to protect Junior Mu in the Tsang Poseidon Palace. Yeah, with Jun Kong, we don't need to worry too much about Mu's safety in the Tsang Poseidon Palace, said the man in his 30s. He was Lian Qi, as well as Jun Kong's master. He was one of the 4 ancestors of the Taoist sect of divine sound. There's no time to lose. Let's set off right now. Guna stood up and glanced at Lian Qi warmly before the 4 of them immediately left. At the same time, in a gloomy space that never saw the light of day, the environment was extremely horrible. Swamps were everywhere and poisonous insects roamed about. There were also abnormally powerful magical beasts and creatures of various races that appeared and disappeared mysteriously. Bloody battles could be seen everywhere. At this moment, a blood-soaked young man was engaged in an intense battle with 100-meter-tall, golden-haired, huge ape in a dense forest. Their battle was extremely intense. Every clash was like the collision of 2 huge meteors. With deafening booms, terrifying ripples of energy were kicked out. Every time they struck out, they would be accompanied by overwhelming origin energy, causing the surroundings to collapse. The huge ape was also covered in blood. Its thick, golden fur had already been dyed red. It roared out furiously as it struck out time and time again, engaging in a battle to the death with the young man. The battle lasted for several hours. In the end, the young man's sword pierced the golden ape's forehead with a strand of sword chi. Only then did the battle end. After the battle, the young man knelt on one knee as he gasped for breath. He murmured, I never thought that the ancient great apes would be so powerful. It's just a young gold king at the same cultivation level, yet it's so difficult to deal with. I really wonder just how terrifying dark gold kings are. It's already very impressive that you can defeat a gold king of the ancient great apes. As for dark gold kings, it's impossible for you to be their opponent unless you're in the top 10 of the divine king's throne. That's because the bloodline of dark gold kings of the ancient great apes is only second to the bloodline of warring gods. At this moment, a woman's voice rang out of nowhere, reverberating through the entire world. With that, the gloomy world that never saw the light of day suddenly began to distort violently. The entire world actually began to blur at a visible rate before disappearing in the end. It was replaced by a huge empty space. To no surprise, the blood-soaked young man stood in the huge space. Around him was an unimaginably colossal formation. Every single inscription that made up the formation shone brightly, shining like stars. However, the pulses of energy within were so powerful that they were enough to destroy the world. Even in the saints' world, this was a formation that stood at the very peak. The gloomy world and the golden great ape from before were all conjured by the formation. Even though the world was illusory, the battle was real. As a result, the blood on the young man truly flowed from his body, and his wounds were real as well. It's just a pity that a dark gold king of the ancient great apes hasn't appeared for several million years already. The woman's voice rang out again. Her voice was filled with pity. This time, her voice was no longer vague and elusive. Instead, it rang out clearly behind the young man. A few 100 meters behind the young man, there was a woman in her 20s wearing a long red dress. She stood there silently. Although the woman seemed like a mortal without any ripples of cultivation, her temperament was extraordinary. She had a beauty that could outshine the moon and put flowers to shame. The young man, whose body was covered in blood and wounds, turned to look at the woman. He chuckled and cupped his hands at the woman in red. "Greetings, 8th Senior Sister! Although you were sent up by Senior Bishing, you still haven't formally become my disciple, so you can't be considered my junior brother yet. Pack up immediately. Master wants to see you," the woman said to the young man before turning around and leaving. "Master wants to see me?" The young man blinked when he heard that. He thought to himself, "I've been here for so long, yet I've never seen Master. Let alone Master, I haven't seen a third person aside from that old man Bishing and 8th Senior Sister. Moreover, that old man Bishing can't even be called a person. He's just an artifact, spirit. However, that old man Bishing always brags about how powerful Master is, yet I've never seen Master before. Now I can finally see Master with my own eyes. If Master really is as powerful as that old man Bishing says, it shouldn't be difficult for Master to send me back." Chapter 2155. Before long, the young man had changed into a clean set of clothes. He wore a snow-white robe as he muttered to himself as he followed behind the woman in red. As for his injuries, they had miraculously healed in that short amount of time. He had completely recovered. The two of them remained silent along the way. In the end, the young man arrived in a majestic hall under the woman's lead. As soon as he entered the hall, the young man's heart suddenly shuddered. He studied the hall as a sliver of sternness appeared on his face. At this moment, he felt like he had arrived in an extremely vast universe as he stood in the hall. It actually made him feel insignificant. At the same time, an invisible pressure seemed to impact his soul, causing it to tremble uncontrollably. "Disciple by Roan greets Master." At this moment, the woman in red knelt down and bowed. Her voice was filled with respect. As for the young man, as soon as he entered the hall, his mind seemed to have been taken away by the vast and majestic aura of the hall. He fell into a state of shock and absent-mindedness. Only when the woman in red's voice rang out did he suddenly come back to his senses, and he immediately looked over with rapt attention. A figure sat on a throne at the very front of the hall. He radiated with the dense light of laws, causing space to distort. As a result, it was impossible to see his true appearance. Even his body seemed blurry and hazy. This was the first thing the young man saw. Just as he was about to continue looking curiously, he suddenly felt a piercing pain in his eyes, causing him to involuntarily close his eyes. Soon after, as if his body was out of his control, he directly knelt down. This caused the young man to be incomparably shocked. "Disciple Ming Dong greets Master." The young man knelt on the ground with his head lowered. He no longer dared to raise his head to look at the person on the throne. He felt fear from the depths of his heart as he faced the person on the throne. Even his soul trembled. He had a strong feeling that even though his current strength was not weak, the figure sitting on the throne did not even need to make a move. Just a look was enough to destroy his body and soul. To no surprise, the young man was Ming Dong, who had entered the 9th floor of the Anita Tower with Genshin before being sent to the Saints' World by the projection of the heavenly palace of Bishing. After arriving in the Saints' World, Ming Dong understood that the reason why he had been teleported back was all because of the artifact spirit of the heavenly palace of Bishing. Although the artifact spirit of the heavenly palace of Bishing was in the distant Saints' World, it was connected to the projection on the 9th floor of the Anita Tower. After sensing Ming Dong's talent, it acted on its own accord and drained the projection's power to bring Ming Dong over from the Tian Yuan continent. "Ming Dong, I have yet to accept you as my disciple. It's too early for you to call me master." The figure on the throne spoke. His voice seemed to have fused with all the music in the world, making it impossible to tell whether he was male or female. All he could sense was an icy cold indifference. However, You do indeed possess extraordinary talent for the laws of destruction. You've comprehended the laws of destruction to such a level in such a short amount of time. You have the right to become my disciple, the figure continued. His voice was emotionless, but it was filled with supreme dignity. I, the Inata Grand Prime, formally accept you as my disciple today. Ming Dong, are you willing to accept me as your master? Disciple is willing. Disciple Ming Dong greets master, Ming Dong said politely. From today onwards, you will be my 9th disciple. You will inherit my laws of destruction. Whether you can comprehend it to the limit will be up to your luck. As the Inata Grand Prime said that, he extended a finger, and a streak of light immediately shot into Ming Dong's forehead. Ming Dong shuddered, and he could not help but close his eyes. The streak of light contained an extremely vast amount of information. Even with the current strength of Ming Dong's soul, he struggled to digest it all in a short amount of time. After who knew how long, Ming Dong finally opened his eyes slowly. He looked at the hazy figure of the Inata Grand Prime and hesitated for a while before making up his mind. Master, Disciple has a request. Disciple knows that Master is resourceful, so I hope Master can send Disciple back to my original world, because Disciple has a close friend who has gone through thick and thin with me. Disciple hopes to bring that brother of mine to the Saints' world as well. I hope Master can fulfill my request. The brother you speak of is already in the Saints' world. If you want to find him, go to the Tsang Poseidon Palace. By Rome, take 9th Junior away, said the Inata Grand Prime. Yes, Master, Bairong replied politely before leaving with Ming Dong politely. Ming Dong, on the other hand, became dazed. Disbelief remained on his face. He had done everything he could to return to the Tianyuan continent to find Jianqin, but he had never thought that he would receive the shocking news that Jianqin had already arrived in the Saints' world from his master. 8th Senior, how does Master know who my brother is? And how does he know that my brother has already arrived in the Saints' world? And how does he know so clearly? Oh, right, what kind of place is the Tsang Poseidon Palace? Ming Dong looked at Bai Rong in confusion after leaving the hall. Bai Rong's expression did not change at all. She said calmly, Master's level of cultivation has already reached an unbelievable level. He's the sovereign of a world, an existence akin to the laws of the world. With a single thought, he can see through the mysteries of the world and peer into the past, present, and future. It's obviously extremely simple for him to find out where your brother is. Huh? That's so powerful. In other words, across the entire Saints' world, or even the countless lower worlds. Doesn't that mean Master can find someone with a single thought no matter how far away they are, even if they're separated by thousands of miniature worlds? Ming Dong asked in shock. That's true for some weaker existences. However, if they're Grand Primes, it'll be extremely difficult for Master to find them with his abilities because experts at that level already have methods to hide their tracks, said Bairong. After formally becoming a disciple, Ming Dong's status was completely different from before. Bairong answered all of his questions to the best of her ability. However, Ming Dong also learnt an extremely shocking piece of news from Bairong. 4 of the Inata Grand Prime's 9 disciples were already dead. Only his 1st senior sister, 3rd senior brother, 5th senior sister, and 8th senior sister remained. 8th senior sister, may I ask where the Tsang Poseidon Palace is? Ming Dong asked. As soon as he thought about how Jianqin was in the Tsang Poseidon Palace, he could not help but become excited. He wanted to see Jianqin immediately. Chapter 2156. Jianqin floated on the 8th floor of the Neptunian Divine Palace in the lava that was hot enough to melt low-quality god artifacts. His entire body was covered by the scorching lava as he slowly sank towards the bottom of the lava. Jianqin had completely lost consciousness at this moment. He was unconscious, so he had no idea that he was facing an unprecedented danger. The lava there was just too terrifying. It could even melt tough god artifacts, let alone Jianqin's body. Even though his chaotic body had reached the 12th layer, Even if he pushed the defenses of the chaotic body to the limit, it would only be equivalent to a supreme quality saint artifact at most. Naturally, he was unable to protect himself in the lava. Not to mention, he was unconscious right now. His body was not filled with chaotic force, so he had not pushed the defenses of the chaotic body to the limit. As a result, his body had not reached its peak at all. As a result, in less than 3 seconds after he fell into the lava, his body had been charred black. All his skin had cracked. 5 seconds after Genshin fell into the lava, his body began to melt away bit by bit. It had been reduced to ashes, fusing with the lava. Moreover, as time passed bit by bit, Genshin's body melted faster and faster. At this rate, Genshin's entire body would probably be reduced to nothingness in less than 10 seconds. His soul would be wiped out in the end. At this moment, Genshin was in great danger. If he was conscious, he might have had a chance at escaping from the lava with the toughness of the chaotic body. However, he just happened to be unconscious. At this critical moment, the damaged Anata Tower appeared near Genshin. It rapidly approached Genshin. Afterwards, Kea, who had been forcefully thrown into the Anata Tower by Genshin, suddenly flew out of the Anata Tower with a barrier of energy around her. She headed straight for Genshin. As soon as Kea left the Anata Tower, the barrier of energy around her immediately dimmed. It only lasted for a while before showing signs of shattering. However, Kea moved extremely quickly. When the barrier of energy around her shattered, she had already successfully carried Genshin's scorching body and entered the Anata Tower with a flash. At that moment, if Genshin was still conscious, he would definitely be extremely surprised. This was because Kai actually did not need his permission at all as the half-owner of the Anata Tower. She could move about freely in the Anata Tower. Kea gently placed Genshin on the ground on the first floor of the Anata Tower. When Genshin's body came in contact with the ground, the rock below him immediately began to melt, forming a small pool of scorching lava. Genshin had just emerged from the lava, so he naturally still possessed the terrifying heat from the lava. It was enough to melt the tough rock into liquid form. A sliver of worry appeared in Kea's eyes as she looked at Genshin's wounds. After a moment of thought, she took out several god-tier heavenly resources from her space ring. She ground a portion of them into powder before gently sprinkling it on Genshin. She directly fed the other portion into Genshin's mouth. The effects of god-tier heavenly resources were obviously unquestionable. Genshin's wounds immediately healed at a visible rate. His charred skin gradually regained some of its normal color. This time, Genshin's wounds were extremely severe. Even after using several god-tier heavenly resources and the supreme recovery of his chaotic body, it still took him 3 whole days to make a full recovery. Even though his wounds had healed, Genshin did not wake up. He remained unconscious. Ziyun and Xiaoman had arrived by Genshin's side long ago. They looked at the unconscious Genshin with deep worry. Big brother is fine. Why hasn't he woken up yet? Xiaoman crouched beside Genshin and said in low spirits, "He's fine now. It's just that there's something wrong with his soul, so he should be unconscious for a few days." Kea looked at Genshin and said softly, "Ziyun will remember the kindness of my 2 benefactors. If there is an opportunity in the future, Ziyun will definitely repay you." Ziyun bowed deeply towards Kea and said solemnly. She was filled with gratitude. This time, Genshin remained unconscious for a very long time. He only woke up after half a month. As soon as he opened his eyes, he felt a slight, piercing pain from his soul. "Ah, big brother, you've finally woken up. Fantastic, fantastic. Sister Ziyun, Sister Kea, big brother has woken up." Xiaoman's voice rang out in Genshin's ears as soon as possible. She was filled with excitement and joy. There was no need for her to remind him. The moment Genshin opened his eyes, Ziyun and Kea sensed him and made their way over. Genshin slowly sat up. He looked around in confusion, but soon after, Everything that had happened before he fainted flashed through his head. He clearly remembered how he had been surrounded by the Divine King and how the evil power had appeared in the end. Jianchen had no idea what had happened after he lost his mind and fell under the control of the evil power. "Are we safe now?" Jianchen looked at Kea and slowly stood up. As soon as he steadied himself, he swayed and felt dizzy, almost causing him to fall to the ground. Kea immediately supported Jianchen. He asked in concern, "Jianchen, are you all right?" Jianchen gently shook his head. "I'm fine. My soul is a little injured. This should have been caused by the evil power. We're currently in the tower. The tower has already sunk to the bottom of the lava, so it's impossible for the people above to come down. There's no issue with safety. You should heal up here first," said Kea. "Benefactor, I have some pills here that can heal injuries to the primordial spirit. Take them quickly." Ziyun immediately passed a jade bottle to Jianchen. The jade bottle contained a god-tier pill for healing the soul. The pill had been left behind by a chaotic prime of the Taoist sect of Neptunia in the past. She had obtained the chaotic prime's legacy, so she naturally obtained everything from him. Chapter 2157. The amethyst spiritual bamboo came from the Xianhuang microcosm in the lower sea realm. It was one of the heavenly resources that could heal the soul. Its effects were extremely powerful. Coupled with the fact that the amethyst spiritual bamboo grew in the Xianhuang microcosm and was constantly contaminated by Xianhuang qi, it possessed some Xianhuang qi to a certain extent. As a result, the effects of the amethyst spiritual bamboo were strengthened even further. As a result, even though the amethyst spiritual bamboo in Jianchen's possession was not of a particularly high grade, so its effects on Divine King experts should not be particularly obvious. However, when Jianchen dripped 2 droplets of sap into his forehead, his injured soul recovered in a very short amount of time. "I've finally used up all the amethyst spiritual bamboo I obtained in the Xianhuang microcosm." Jianchen slowly opened his eyes. He had already recovered from his injuries after being unconscious for half a month. Now that his soul had recovered as well, he had returned to his peak condition. However, there was not the slightest trace of happiness on his face. Instead, he was frowning with worry on his face. After the battle last time, he had deeply sensed that the backlash from the evil power was becoming more and more powerful. Although he could still suppress the evil power with its current strength, once the power of his soul became too exhausted or too heavily injured, the evil power hidden in his soul could launch a counterattack at any time. Even the secret warnings from the sword spirits were useless. However, what made him feel helpless was that even though he had reached the level of Divine King, he still had not found a way to completely resolve this problem. This was because the evil power had already fused with his soul. It had basically become a part of his soul. Removing it was easier said than done. At this moment, Kea arrived before Jianchen. Looking at the worried Jianchen, he seemed to know what was on Jianchen's mind. He said, "Jianchen, don't worry too much. There are quite a few supreme divine kings in Poseidon Palace. They come from various peak organizations in the Saints' world, so what they know is not something regular divine kings can compare to. Perhaps they know some ancient methods that can completely resolve the problem with your soul. With our current situation, it'll probably be difficult for us to get along with those supreme divine kings, unless we hand Xiaoman over. Whatever, let's not talk about this. There's no point in worrying about the problem with my soul. Let's go take a look at the world at the bottom of the lava. I hope it won't disappoint me too much." Jianchen stood up, and the gloominess on his face vanished in a single instant. He smiled freely, and with a thought he controlled the power of the Anatat Tower to send him and Kea to the exit. The exit of the Anatat Tower was a damaged door. It was so damaged that it did not even need to be opened to allow people to enter and exit freely. It was even possible to see the boiling lava outside, clearly from within the door. Of course, Jianchen knew that this was only on the surface. The Anatat Tower was an extremely high-quality god artifact, after all. let alone the fact that the door was damaged. Even if it had vanished, no one would be able to enter the Inata Tower without his permission. Even the lava that filled every inch of the space outside was unable to seep in through the door. The lava here is far too powerful. With the current strength of my soul, it's impossible for me to expand beyond the lava. It looks like I need to go outside personally. Genshin frowned slightly and said sternly. He understood extremely well just how terrifying the lava outside was. Even if he pushed the defenses of the chaotic body to the limit, he would not be able to last for too long. You have to be careful. This is the very bottom of the lava. The lava is so hot that it's much hotter than the surface. With the toughness of your body, you might be able to last for a while on the surface, but you'll probably only be able to last for a few seconds or even less at the bottom, Kea said from beside Genshin. He was extremely cautious and slightly worried. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. I don't want to lose my life here. Genshin glanced at Kea to reassure him. He was filled with confidence. The lava at the bottom was indeed terrifying, but it was impossible for it to kill him in a single instance, where he would not even have the time to flee. Genshin sucked in a deep breath and silently circulated the chaotic body. He pushed the defenses of the chaotic body to the limit before protecting himself with light. After making sufficient preparations, he left the Inata Tower in a flash and entered the scorching lava outside. Genshin, you have to be careful. Don't go too far. If you can't last any longer, come back immediately. Don't force yourself, Kea said from behind. At the same time, she had made preparations to charge out without any hesitation as soon as Genshin encountered danger. As soon as he left the Inata Tower, an indescribably terrifying heat surged over. In just a single instance, the light around Genshin dimmed. In less than half a second, it shattered. What a terrifying lava! If this lava was placed outside, I'm afraid that even the void wouldn't be able to withstand the high temperature and would shatter. The bottom of the lava really does have the ability to melt god artifacts. Only a high-quality god artifact, like the Azure Poseidon Palace, can easily endure the terrifying heat here. Genshin was secretly surprised. The moment the light around him shattered, the scorching lava was already close to his body. Immediately he felt a bone-gnawing pain, causing Genshin's body to tremble slightly. However, the pain was no different from scratching and itch compared to the torment he felt when his body was being tempered every time his chaotic body broke through. He endured it easily. However, in the next moment, Genshin's body suddenly stiffened. This stiffening lasted for less than a split second before he began to tremble again. He did not tremble because of the terrifying heat. Instead, he trembled because of the great joy and excitement in his heart. Genshin was unable to expand the senses of his soul at the bottom of the lava, so his vision was limited. He could only see 100 meters away. However, all he could see within that range were fiery red crystals of various sizes that basically covered the entire ground. Genshin was naturally familiar with these crystals. They were extremely valuable, fire divine crystals. If he were to compare fire divine crystals of the same size to divine crystals, a single fire divine crystal would be 10 times more valuable than a supreme grade divine crystal. However, there were so many fire divine crystals at the bottom of the lava that they were like rocks hidden in a riverbed. They covered the entire ground, forming a thick layer. There were simply too many to count. Genshin's breathing could not help but become heavy. Great joy filled his heart. What was his objective in coming to the Azure Poseidon Palace? It was not for the legacy, nor was it for the treasures. His main objective was to obtain enough wealth for him to use the interplanar teleportation formation to return to the cloud plane and head to the Taoist sect of Divine Sound and the Ice Goddess Hall. The Taoist sect of Divine Sound had his wife, Shangguan Mu-er. The Ice Goddess Hall had his second sister, Chanyang Mingyue, whom he had not seen in many years. There was even the heavenly palace of Bishing that the Inata Grand Prime resided in. This was because Mingdong had been brought to the saint's world by the heavenly palace of Bixingbak when he was still on the Tianyuan continent. Traveling to these different planes required tremendous amounts of divine crystals. Only then could he reach them in the shortest amount of time possible. Otherwise, he would have to use a spatial battleship, which would take him several thousand years or even several tens of thousand years to reach his destination. Jianchen could not afford to wait that long, so he needed to use the interplanar teleportation formation. However, Jianchen saw hope in reuniting with his wife, Shangguanmu, or his sister, and Mingdong with so many fire divine crystals. Chapter 2158. Without any hesitation, Jianchen immediately began to collect the fire divine crystals. He stabbed his hands into the fire divine crystals on the ground and entered the Inita Tower in a flash with some of them. Jianchen appeared out of nowhere in the Inita Tower. He tossed the fire divine crystals to the ground before immediately sitting down. He began to circulate chaotic force to heal his wounds. He had only stayed outside for 5 breaths this time. However, in that short period of time, his body had already suffered significant injuries from the terrifyingly high temperature of the lava. Cracks had appeared all over his skin, and it was scorched red. Naturally, his clothes had been reduced to ashes as soon as possible. As a result, Jianchen was completely naked right now. Kea stood beside Jianchen. She looked at the naked Jianchen, and her face became rather unnatural. She gently clicked her tongue and took out a set of clothes from her space ring to cover Jianchen. Afterwards, she looked at the fire divine crystals Jianchen had brought in. There were not a lot of fire divine crystals, only 8 of them. However, every single one of them was the size of a fist and gave off a fiery presence. Extremely pure and tremendous energy flowed within them. It looks like there really are quite a lot of fire divine crystals at the bottom of the lava, thought Kea. Her eyes lit up as she became rather excited. Jianchen's wounds healed particularly quickly as he circulated his chaotic force to heal. In just 6 hours, he was back to normal. Jianchen, how's the situation outside? Kea immediately asked after Jianchen finished healing. Although she was no weaker than Jianchen, her body was not as tough as Jianchen's, so she did not dare to go out carelessly. As a result, she had no idea what was going on outside. You really haven't let me down. There really are a lot of fire divine crystals at the bottom of the lava. However, I need to think of a way to collect them all. I won't be able to collect a lot with just my 2 hands, Jianchen smiled. Jianchen smiled. The temperature at the bottom of the lava was just too high, so he did not dare to take his space ring out. As a result, he needed to think of another method to collect the fire divine crystals. Jianchen sank into his thoughts before taking out the primordial god silk from his space ring. The primordial god silk had already snapped in 2 when he faced the crisis of the world. However, even though it was damaged, it had still been refined by Jianchen, so the length of the primordial god silk could be changed according to his will. With a thought, Jianchen immediately controlled one of the strands of primordial god silk to weave a piece of armor for himself, while the other strand of primordial god silk turned into a huge golden net with a thought. According to the sword spirits, the primordial god silk can be refined into extremely powerful treasures of the world, but refining such a powerful treasure will obviously require many high-quality materials. Moreover, there's an extremely harsh requirement on the ability of the refiner, Jianchen said. As a result, I obviously can't refine the primordial god silk into a treasure of the world with my current ability. However, the primordial god silk is of a high grade after all. It shouldn't be melted so easily at the bottom of the lava, Jianchen thought. He left the Inita Tower in a flash with a huge golden net in his hand and the Inita Tower in the blink of an eye. Jianchen paid close attention to the primordial god silk as soon as he arrived at the bottom of the lava outside the Inita Tower. He did not want something as precious as the primordial god silk to be damaged again. However, Jianchen stopped worrying very soon. As soon as the primordial god silk appeared in the lava, it immediately shone with a faint golden light. The power of divinity circulated within it, preventing the terrifyingly high temperatures from harming the primordial god silk at all. The primordial god silk really is powerful. It can actually endure so easily in a place where even god artifacts can be melted. Probably only the evil power of the crisis of the world that can devour all things can damage the primordial god silk, Jianchen thought. Jianchen made up his mind. With a wave of his hand, he immediately cast out the net in his hand, trapping a region of fire divine crystals. Afterwards, he suddenly pulled out a large pile of fire divine crystals. At the same time, 5 seconds had passed. Jianchen's body had reached the limit of what it could endure. Without any hesitation, he dragged the large pile of fire divine crystals with the net and returned to the Anita Tower as quickly as he could. The golden armor he wore could not be regarded as a defensive treasure. The scorching lava at the bottom of the lava could still seep in through the cracks and injure Jianchen's body. As a result, even with the primordial god silk, Jianchen could only remain outside for 5 seconds. His life would be in danger once he exceeded this time limit. Jianchen shook his hand and removed the golden net from the Anita Tower. Immediately, a large pile of fire divine crystals that flickered with red light piled up on the ground. There were so many of them that there were several hundred of them. The larger ones were the size of a fist, while the smaller ones were only the size of a thumb. The harvest this time was over 100 times greater than last time. Kea became stunned when she saw so many fire divine crystals. Although she had learnt from Jianchen that there were many fire divine crystals outside, she had never thought that there would be so many. Jianchen had only been gone for 5 seconds, yet he had already collected so many. Afterwards, Jianchen began to collect the fire divine crystals at the bottom of the lava without any regard for exhaustion. Every time he went out, he would only remain for 5 seconds. Once he returned, he would need several hours to heal. He repeated this over and over again, allowing him to collect a large number of fire divine crystals every day. Jianchen had basically forgotten about Ziyun and Xiaoman, who were still in the Anita Tower. He seemed to be especially busy during the days he collected fire divine crystals. He was completely focused on the matter of the fire divine crystals, so much so that he did not even have the time to talk to Kea, who always stayed by his side to watch over him. While Jianchen was busy collecting fire divine crystals, the Cerulean Poseidon Palace was not peaceful. Many large organizations in the Saints' world had already learnt that the artifact spirit of the Cerulean Poseidon Palace had awakened. So many divine kings who did not care about the legacies in the Cerulean Poseidon Palace used teleportation formations from various places in the Saints' world to gather in the Cerulean Poseidon Palace. The sudden appearance of a large number of unfamiliar faces in the Cerulean Poseidon Palace made the cultivators who had entered the Cerulean Poseidon Palace feel like a storm was brewing. They could already smell blood, so all the cultivators secretly became cautious. They all felt threatened. Strange. Why have so many people suddenly appeared in the Cerulean Poseidon Palace? I feel like there are more than 10 times more people than before. Where did so many Neptunian medallions come from? The arrival of these people is probably related to the appearance of the Neptunian moon. As for the Neptunian medallions, a few peak organizations can replicate them a long time ago. After all, the Neptunian medallion hasn't been updated for several million years. Discussions like this could be heard everywhere in the Cerulean Poseidon Palace. However, whenever people mention these matters, they would become stern. None of the people who had suddenly appeared in the Cerulean Poseidon Palace were simple. There were many supreme, divine kings among them. This made many of the divine kings and some of the regular divine kings in the Cerulean Poseidon Palace feel extremely pressured. At this moment, on the first floor of the Cerulean Poseidon Palace, a white-robed young man with an imposing appearance looked around excitedly. There was even some undisguised eagerness in his eyes. Chapter 2159. Behind the young man were 5 guards in golden armor. Their golden helmets covered their faces, making it impossible for anyone to see their appearances. They gave off a sense of mystery. There were also many divine king realm experts, gathered in groups of 3 to 5 around the young man. However, basically all of their gazes were gathered in the direction of the white-robed young man, or more accurately, they were gathered on the 5 guards behind the young man. They all showed fear. The white-robed young man ignored the gazes in the surroundings. He smiled warmly and said, "Let's go. Let's go up and ask around. These people have just come in from outside, so there's no point in asking them." As the white-clothed young man spoke and laughed, he had already left at lightning speed. Behind him, the 5 golden-armored guards followed closely. Am I seeing things? The 5 people in golden armor seemed to be divine generals of the heavenly palace of Bishing. It can't be wrong. The divine generals of the heavenly palace of Bishing all wear standard armor. They have the insignia of the heavenly palace of Bishing on them. No one dares to copy them. Without a doubt, they are divine generals of the heavenly palace of Bishing. But that doesn't make sense. Why would a supreme existence like the heavenly palace of Bishing send divine generals to the Tsang Poseidon Palace? I don't believe that the heavenly palace of Bishing is interested in the Tsang Poseidon Palace. It's obvious that the 5 divine generals follow the young man's lead, but who is the young man? Is he the disciple of one of the majesties of the heavenly palace of Bishing? After the young man left, a heated discussion immediately broke out at the entrance to the first floor of the Tsang Poseidon Palace. The young man was actually protected by divine generals of the heavenly palace of Bishing, which attracted everyone's attention. Even the supreme divine, king among them, became cautious. It doesn't matter who the young man is. We can't afford to make him our enemy. Even though the ancestor once said that the Anata Grand Exalt died over 3 million years ago, the heavenly palace of Bishing still has a few majesties supporting it. Apart from the 8th majesty, any one of the 3 remaining majesties are not people that our ancestor can provoke. They can destroy our clan with just a flick of their fingers. At this moment, many divine kings communicated with their people secretly. Even some supreme divine kings warned the people beside them sternly. To no surprise, the white-robed young man that everyone discussed was Ming Dong, who had specially come to the Tsang Poseidon Palace in search of Jianshin. At this moment, Ming Dong wandered around the Tsang Poseidon Palace with the 5 divine generals. Whenever he came across people, he would go up to ask about Jianshin, regardless of their cultivation. Jianshin? You've never heard of him? Brother, I've only come to the Tsang Poseidon Palace recently, so I really don't know who Jianshin is. Why don't you leave a method of communication with me? Once I have any news about Jianshin, I'll contact you immediately. Ming Dong asked a few people in a row, but the results were very clear. The people he met had all come to the Tsang Poseidon Palace after him. They had not come here much earlier than him, so they naturally did not know about Jianshin. All the people stopped by Ming Dong became extremely polite when they saw the unique attire of the 5 divine generals and the insignia of the heavenly palace of Bishing. They did not dare to slack off at all. The heavenly palace of Bishing was indeed too far away from the cultivators who struggled at the bottom. Some of them did not even have the right to know about the heavenly palace of Bishing. However, the heavenly palace of Bishing was not unfamiliar to the disciples of peak organizations. There's no one on the lower floors. It looks like I have to go up a few more floors, Ming Dong murmured to himself. Then he looked at the 5 divine generals behind him and said, "Your armor is just too dazzling. Although I've come to the Tsang Poseidon Palace this time to look for my brother, Jianshin, 8th senior sister has arranged a training mission for me at the same time. If you continue to wear this armor, I won't be able to train. Put it away. Don't wear it unless it's a life or death situation." "Yes, 9th Majesty," the 5 divine generals replied together. They all put away their golden armor and revealed their original appearances. The 5 of them all appeared to be middle-aged men. They were all emotionless, and their gazes were extremely cold. Every single one of them had gone through countless battles. They were vicious people who had emerged from mountains of corpses and seas of blood. Without their golden armor, no one could recognize them as divine generals of the heavenly palace of Bishing. Afterwards, Mingdong led the 5 divine generals through the Tsang, Poseidon Palace. Only when they arrived on the 9th floor did he finally stop a passing divine king. He clasped his fist politely and asked, "Sir, have you heard of a person called Jianqin?" Jianqin? But a handsome young man who only seems to be in his 20s? The laws of the sword he comprehended? The divine king was surprised and replied with a question. Yes. It's him. If you know Jianqin's whereabouts, please tell me. I will definitely thank you greatly. Mingdong immediately became excited. He had been separated from Jianqin for so many years, and now that they were finally going to meet again in a foreign land, he struggled to remain calm. He became extremely excited. Jianqin is dead. Nothing remains of him. You can stop dreaming if you want to find him, the divine king said indifferently. He ignored Mingdong and directly left. Mingdong's smile suddenly froze. His excitement seemed to freeze in that moment. His heart stopped beating, and his blood stopped flowing. The divine king's words exploded in Mingdong's head like a bolt from the blue. It reverberated through his head, stunning him. Jianqin is dead. He's already dead. Mingdong murmured softly as if he had lost his soul in that moment. However, that only lasted for a moment. In the next moment, his gaze suddenly became extremely sharp and terrifying. A presence as vast as the ocean radiated from him. Impossible! This is impossible! This is absolutely impossible! Mingdong roared out furiously. He caught up to the divine king in a flash. He no longer acted as gracefully as before. He directly grabbed the divine king by his clothes and lifted him up. He roared out, "What did you just say? You're lying to me, right? You're lying to me, right? Tell me, you're lying to me. You're lying to me." Mingdong seemed to have lost his mind. Just a moment ago, he was still imagining the beautiful scene and joy of reuniting with Jianqin. However, in the next moment, he heard that Jianqin was dead. The huge difference was a huge blow to him. He struggled to accept it. The divine king was immobilized by Mingdong's presence. He could not help but pale in fright. He said with a trembling voice, "Senior, I only heard about Jianqin's death through hearsay. I didn't see it with my own eyes. Perhaps what I heard was fake. You must be lying to me. My brother can't have died here." Mingdong roared out furiously and tossed the divine king far away. He immediately stopped a second divine king nearby and asked the same question. "Sai, Jianqin really is dead. I saw that battle clearly from nearby. There were a total of 8 divine kings who attacked him together. Jianqin fought against them with his cultivation as an early divine king. In the end, he died on the 8th floor. His corpse fell into the lava, leaving nothing behind." The divine king shook his head and sighed. His face was filled with pity. How regretful. A supreme prodigy like Jianqin actually died at such a young age at the hands of several divine kings. If he had enough time to grow, he probably would have had the right to become the strongest divine king. With another gentle sigh, the divine king left Mingdong's side. "Arg!" Mingdong roared out at the sky. His voice, filled with grief and indignation, rang through most of the 9th floor. At the same time, extremely powerful, terrifying killing intent erupted from his body like a flood, causing the origin energy in the surroundings to become chaotic. The second divine king had personally witnessed the earth-shaking battle, so he spoke in great detail. Every part he spoke of appeared in Mingdong's head like a real scene. It was like Mingdong could see Jianqin being surrounded and fighting against 8 divine kings with his cultivation as an early divine king. In the end, he was buried by the lava. Mingdong was in so much pain that he wanted to die. He was filled with grief and indignation. He refused to believe, nor was he able to accept, that something like this would happen just when he was about to reunite with his long-lost brother. Reality had become so cruel. I'm too late, I'm too late. Mingdong's heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife. He was in great pain. He knelt on the ground powerlessly, his fists pounding the ground again and again. The ground trembled as if there was an earthquake. His eyes were bloodshot. Ninth Majesty, my condolences. A divine general comforted him. Suddenly, Mingdong left as quickly as he could with a single movement. He directly flew towards the 8th floor. Ninth Majesty. The faces of the 5 divine kings changed slightly. They all cried out as they chased after him. Mingdong directly arrived on the 8th floor. He looked at the boiling lava below and did not hesitate at all. He put on a set of armor and directly charged down. The armor he was wearing was a divine artifact. With the protection of the divine artifact armor, even if it was difficult for him to reach the bottom of the lava, he would still be able to survive for a while in the lava's surface. Even if my brother dies, I won't let him die here. Mingdong's eyes were filled with determination. Determination flooded Mingdong's eyes. He charged into the lava with determination, wanting to find Jian Chen's corpse. Ninth Majesty, don't! Behind him, the expressions of the 5 divine generals from the heavenly palace of Bishing changed drastically. They all used their speed, charging over to stop Mingdong even faster than him. Move! Mingdong called out. His gaze was extremely sharp. However, the 5 divine generals had been specially chosen by his 8th senior sister. They were the 5 most powerful divine kings in the heavenly palace of Bishing. Every single one of them possessed supreme cultivation and new powerful secret techniques. Their cultivation methods had been created by the Anata Grand Prime in the past, making them even more powerful than some supreme prodigies. Mingdong was unable to resist at all when the 5 of them worked together. He was taken into the air. Ninth Majesty, the lava is extremely terrifying. It can even melt god artifacts. Jianqin has been in the lava for so long, so he's probably dead already. Instead of putting yourself in danger and doing useless things, why don't you save your strength and take revenge for Jianqin? Said a divine general. Revenge. Mingdong gradually calmed down. His eyes became filled with cold killing intent. Chapter 2160. Afterwards, the 9th Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing, the 9th disciple of the Anata Grand Prime, Mingdong, seemed to have gone mad. He searched the entire palace for the 8 divine kings who had attacked Jianqin. He even offered an extremely tempting bounty for the identities and locations of the 8 divine kings. As soon as this matter spread, it immediately caused quite a stir in the Azure Poseidon Palace. Even a few of the divine kings below the divine kings paid close attention to it. I knew it. Jianqin has only just broken through to divine king. Yet he possesses such great battle prowess. He must be a prodigy of some supreme organization. Do you see it now? Someone has already come to avenge him. They're even willing to become enemies with the 8 divine kings below the divine kings. Although I can't say that I know all of the divine kings who attacked Jianqin, I just happen to know the backgrounds of 2 of them. Every single one of them represents an extremely terrifying supreme organization. Just who is the person who wants to avenge Jianqin? Is he bold enough to offend several supreme organizations at the same time? Not only will he fail to avenge Jianqin, but he'll also drag himself down with him. As long as you provide the identity of one of them, you'll receive a supreme quality saint artifact as a reward. If you provide the exact location, you'll receive a god-tier pill as a reward. Heavens, who is this person? He can take out supreme quality saint artifacts and god-tier pills so easily. Isn't he a little too rich? Looks like the person who wants to avenge Jianqin has an extremely extraordinary background. He doesn't fear the 8 divine kings at all. He doesn't even take the organizations behind the 8 divine kings seriously. The topic of the astronomical bounty could basically be heard everywhere in the Azure Poseidon Palace. Supreme quality saint artifacts and god-tier pills were extremely tempting, let alone the regular divine kings. Even some of the divine kings who were not particularly wealthy were tempted. As soon as Ming Dong's astronomical bounty was announced, it caused a huge commotion in the Azure Poseidon Palace. It became a new topic of discussion. Even the divine kings who had come later all learnt about the story behind the bounty. They learnt that an extremely powerful divine king had appeared in the Azure Poseidon Palace. The divine kings who had come later were very calm. They did not take it too seriously. They either had extremely great backgrounds or were extremely powerful. They had not come for the legacies or treasures. Instead, they had come for the Azure Poseidon Palace. However, very soon, when another bounty for the 8 divine kings was announced, not only were 99% of the people in the Azure Poseidon Palace stunned, but even many of the divine kings were filled with disbelief. A low-quality god artifact as a reward for capturing any one of the 8 divine kings? He's crazy, he's crazy, he's crazy! A low-quality god artifact as a reward? Is this person just spouting nonsense to trick everyone? Or is he really that wealthy? Heavens, this is just too crazy. A god artifact. That's a god artifact. Even if it's only a low-quality god artifact, it's still priceless in the saints' world. Let alone the fact that every divine king treats it as a treasure. Even many infinite primes would fight to the death for a low-quality god artifact. A low-quality god artifact for each person captured. If all 8 of them are captured, wouldn't that be 8 low-quality god artifacts? That's unbelievable. Who is this person? Can he really take out so many god artifacts? As soon as the god artifacts were tossed out, it immediately caused a huge commotion in the Azure Poseidon Palace. Even the divine kings who had entered later were stunned. With the astronomical bounty that tempted countless people, the 8 divine kings who had attacked Jianqin naturally attracted the attention of many people. More and more people searched everywhere for news and whereabouts. Ha ha ha, Jianqin is just an early divine king. So why would he need the 8 of us to surround him? Any single one of us can crush him to death easily. The reason why we're all working together isn't because of how powerful Jianqin is, but because he has something that interests us. We all want that item, which is why it's 8 against 1. To the person who wants to avenge Jianqin, I'll be waiting for you on the 10th floor's Full Moon Peak. I hope you won't make me wait for too long. The supreme god kings who surrounded Jianqin were rather proud as well, so they took the initiative to speak. In the end, their voices reached Ming Dong's ears very soon after being spread around by countless people. Full Moon Peak. Ming Dong murmured on the 9th floor. His eyes were filled with killing intent as he led the 5 divine generals to the Full Moon Peak. At this moment, in a desolate mountain on the 9th floor of the Azure Poseidon Palace, 2 figures, one old and one young, stood at the top of the mountain. They were both stern. The person who's bold enough to avenge Jianqin must have a great background, and he dares to directly place a bounty on the divine king without any fear. It's more than enough to show that he really doesn't take the divine king seriously. Let's hide for now and not venture out, the old man said cautiously. The old man was one of the people who had attacked Jianqin Tsanging. The young man was the greatest overgod Mo Cheng. As an overgod, he possessed the strength to kill regular divine kings. If Jianqin was not included, he really would be a resplendent star. He's fearless, but we don't have to fear him, Mo Cheng said coldly. Even though he was still very far away from the divine king, he showed no fear towards him at all. Of course, we're not afraid, but young master, you're not the divine king's opponent right now. Once you face the person who wants to avenge Jianqin, I'm not confident I can protect you, said Songing. Then I'll contact master and get him to send reinforcements, said Mo Cheng. There's no need to alarm master. The trip to the Azure Poseidon Palace is only a trial for the young master. At the same time, a young man in golden clothes sat on the ground somewhere on the 10th floor. His face was pale, and he was unable to conceal his weakness. Before the young man in golden clothes sat a black-clothed man as well. His face was also pale, and he was weak. Gongzheng, our souls have both been injured by Jianshin. Even with God-tier pills, we won't be able to recover in a short amount of time. Our strength is nowhere close to our peak condition. In our current condition, we can only work together if we want to get a share of the spoils in the Azure Poseidon Palace, said the black-clothed man. He came from the Bai family. His name was Bai. The Bai family was also a large clan in the Saints' world. They were extremely powerful. The young man in golden clothes nodded and agreed to Bai Yi's suggestion. He said, I heard that someone has come to avenge Jianshin, even going as far as to offer up a god artifact as a lure. How bold of them. Bai Yi, are you interested in going to the Moon's View Peak and seeing just what this person is capable of? Chapter 2161. Full Moon Peak was originally an ordinary mountain range in Poseidon Palace, but now this mountain that was so ordinary that most people had never heard of it had become famous after a supreme divine king made a declaration. Practically everyone knew about it. The supreme divine king who had participated in the attack on Jianshin had challenged the person who had placed an astronomical bounty on Full Moon Peak. He wanted to fight this mysterious person of unknown background and identity, but he was extremely wealthy. This news immediately attracted everyone's attention. For a moment, many cultivators gathered in Poseidon Palace from all directions, hurrying towards Full Moon Peak. Firstly, they wanted to see who the person who placed a bounty on one of the 8 divine kings was. Secondly, they wanted to see if this person really had such strength. With the gathering of these people, the number of people around the Full Moon Peak naturally increased. There were even quite a few supreme divine kings among them. They either rested with their eyes closed or looked at Full Moon Peak calmly. 2 figures stood at the very top of the Moon's View Peak. They stood there like javelins as powerful presences radiated from them, blanketing the surroundings. Many ordinary god kings in the surroundings felt a great pressure. The 2 of them were clearly divine kings. They were 2 of the 8 people who had attacked Jianshin. They stood side by side with calm expressions, waiting for the person who had placed the bounty. Do you think the mysterious person who placed the astronomical bounty will come? Of course he'll come. Since the mysterious person is bold enough to place a bounty on one of the 8 divine kings and doesn't care about a low-quality god artifact, he's definitely not a simple person. That's hard to say. Perhaps the mysterious person is just bluffing. As for a low-quality god artifact, have you ever heard of anyone actually obtaining one? Around the Full Moon Peak, low voices of discussion could be heard incessantly. While the crowd was curious about the mysterious person who had offered such a high bounty, they also had some doubts. At this moment, a few streaks of light shot through the pitch-black night sky. They shot over from the distance with lightning speed, hovering above Full Moon Peak in the end. There were 6 people in total. The person in the lead was a young man with an extraordinary bearing, but his face was frosty. Behind the young man were 5 middle-aged men in tight robes. They were all expressionless, and their gazes were cold. Which one of you is the divine king who attacked Jianshin? The young man with the extraordinary bearing stood in the air, looking down from above. His voice was icy cold, and he radiated with powerful, killing intent. To no surprise, the young man was Ming Dong. Everyone's gazes gathered on Full Moon Peak at that moment. Even some of the divine kings who were resting opened their eyes at that moment. They were all curious about the mysterious person who had placed the astronomical bounty on one of the 8 divine kings. It's actually him. With that glance, the eyes of several people in the crowd immediately narrowed. They became cautious at that moment. At the same time, they seemed to understand something. These people had entered Poseidon Palace at the same time as Ming Dong. They had personally witnessed the divine generals of the heavenly palace of Bishing following Mingdong's lead. Looks like you're the person who placed the bounty. As for attacking Jianqin, ha ha ha. Does Jianqin need 8 divine kings to attack him together? He's just an early divine king. Any one of us can kill him easy as crushing an ant. It's just that he has something that interests us, which is why the 8 of us attacked him together. In the end, some people who were watching the show thought that several divine kings were attacking a single early divine king. One of the divine kings on the full moon peak laughed aloud. Afterwards, he took out a piece of blood-soaked white cloth and waved it at Mingdong. He sneered, "Do you see this piece of cloth in my hand? This was taken from Jianqin's body, along with his flesh and blood. Speaking of which, it should be the only thing left behind by Jianqin. If you want it, you can exchange it for a low-quality god artifact." Mingdong's eyes immediately widened as he looked at the blood-soaked piece of cloth in the divine king's hand. He was filled with grief and indignation. He could clearly sense an extremely familiar presence from the cloth. It was the presence unique to Jianqin's chaotic blood. "Arg!" Mingdong roared out furiously. Killing intent surged in his heart as flames of fury burned. Afterwards, he charged towards the divine king on the full moon peak with surging fury. "You've lost your mind so easily. You want to place a bounty on us to avenge Jianqin with just this bit of ability? What a joke! But no matter who you are, the full moon peak will be where you die today." The 2 divine kings on the full moon peak sneered. They both rushed into the air and erupted with astonishing battle prowess, clashing with Mingdong in the air. The 5 divine generals who had come with Mingdong did not take part. Instead, they paid close attention to the battle. The trip to the Neptunian Divine Palace was a very good place for the 9th Majesty to train. They would not take part so easily unless their lives were in danger. "There's no need to worry about this person, but he has come to avenge Jianqin. He'll be an enemy sooner or later. Why don't we kill him now?" Gong Zheng said coldly from the crowd. He and Bai Yi had purposefully disguised themselves this time, so there was no need to worry about being recognized. "Don't be impatient. There are still 5 powerful guards beside him. There's no need to hurry. Let's observe first," said Bai Yi. He stared at the battle between the 3 of them. Violent booms constantly rang out in the air. The battle between Mingdong and the 2 divine kings had already reached its climax. It was extremely intense. It had to be mentioned that Mingdong was very powerful. He had already become one of the divine kings without any doubt. Not only was he no weaker than Jianqin, but he was even slightly stronger than Jianqin. Not only was he not at a disadvantage against the 2 divine kings by himself, but he even seemed to gain the upper hand. Although only a few seconds had passed since the battle between the 3 of them, they were all covered in blood. They were all injured to varying degrees. Sky-crushing sword chi. Suddenly, Mingdong bellowed out. The power of the laws of destruction descended, condensing into a strand of black sword chi that was several meters long. It radiated with a terrifying presence that made all the spectators tremble in fear. It pierced through the air as a streak of black light and shot towards one of them. Chapter 2162. The Divine King dared not be careless at all when he faced Mingdong's god-tier battle skill. He was stern, and he immediately bellowed out. The energy around him surged as the power of laws gathered in the air, forming a dazzling pillar of energy that shot out. He had also used a battle skill. It was very powerful. Although it was not a god-tier battle skill, it seemed to have surpassed the 9th grade of the truth tier. It was on the level of gods. God-tier battle skills were the same as god artifacts. Normally speaking, only primordial realm experts could use them. Among god kings, even the supreme god kings on the god king's throne who could use god-tier battle skills were as rare as phoenix feathers and qilin horns. Of course, there were some god-tier battle skills like the profound sword chi that stole from the mysteries of the world. They did not have particularly high requirements for the user's cultivation, so they could be used by cultivators at lower cultivation realms. However, there were probably less than 3 such battle skills across the entire Immortals world. Even if the Immortals world and the Saints world were combined, there were probably less than a handful of battle skills like that. They were extremely rare and precious. Boom! With a deafening sound, Mingdong's spatial annihilation sword Qi gave off a presence of destruction. It destroyed the pillar of energy like a hot knife through butter. Afterwards, it did not slow down at all, striking the Divine King's chest with unimaginable power. Crack! With a crisp sound, the supreme quality saint artifact on the Divine King's body immediately shattered. His entire chest caved in as the destructive energy rampaged through his body. His organs and meridians were immediately pulverized. His body was heavily injured, and he constantly vomited blood. Mingdong's presence skyrocketed, becoming more and more powerful. Killing intent was so dense that it was almost tangible. He stared at the Divine King furiously and resentfully as he took a step forward. With just a single step, he crossed a huge distance and arrived before the injured Divine King. His sword shone brightly as the laws of destruction gathered. He directly swung down. The strike seemed to possess the power of a domain. When Mingdong swung down, the space around him froze, trapping his opponent firmly. He was unable to move at all. Immediately, blood sprayed into the sky. The Divine King's head was directly cut off by Mingdong's strike. His head separated from his body, and the blood of the Divine King turned into a rain of blood. It shone like stars as it rained down from the sky like a meteor shower. Do you know who I am? As long as their souls remained, they would not truly die. The Divine King that Mingdong had cut off did not die because of this. He stared at Mingdong with eyes filled with hatred as he tried to put up a tough front. Anyone who took part in the attack on Jianqin, no matter who you are or what your background is, will not be able to escape death in the end, because I, Mingdong, will never spare any of you, Mingdong said coldly. Mingdong said coldly. His face was frigid as his killing intent was extremely heavy. He directly grabbed the Supreme God King's head with one hand and used a secret technique to seal up the Supreme God King's soul in the head so that it could not escape. Gu Li's master is the ancestral emperor of an everlasting empire. If you kill him, you better think about the consequences. The other Divine King no longer attacked. He stood in the distance as he stared at Mingdong in shock. Mingdong said nothing. He held the head of one of the Divine Kings in his left hand as he wielded his sword in his right, directly charging towards the second Divine King. After witnessing Mingdong's strength, the second Divine King understood that he was not Mingdong's opponent. He no longer had any interest in fighting. Without any hesitation, he used a secret technique and fled as quickly as he could. "Stop him!" Mingdong called out coldly and immediately ordered the 5 divine generals. If the Divine King wanted to flee, Mingdong really might not be able to stop him. The 5 divine generals had already spread out in the surroundings when Mingdong began to attack. They had already surrounded the battlefield. With Mingdong's order, the 5 of them did not hesitate at all. They immediately raised their hands and used a secret technique to seal off the space there. The expression of the Supreme God King who wanted to flee changed drastically when he sensed the changes in space. He suddenly turned around and stared at Mingdong. He growled, "Sir, do you really plan on killing all of us?" What answered him was a sword imbued with the laws of destruction. It slashed towards him mercilessly. They were not Mingdong's opponent when they were fighting 2 against 1. Now that they were fighting 1-on-1, their disadvantage was even more evident. Before long, the second Divine King was also beheaded by Mingdong. The Divine King's blood dyed the sky red, dyeing the entire moon's full peak red. The battle had come to an end, but the people gathered around the moon's full peak had already fallen silent from shock. Their hearts churned. The 2 Divine Kings below the Divine King were like legends in the eyes of many people. They were existences that only existed in legends, yet now 2 of them had actually died right before their eyes. This greatly shocked them, and they were unable to calm down for a long time. However, the supreme god kings in the crowd were all stern. They stared at Ming Dong without blinking at all, as if they wanted to remember his face firmly. The strength that Ming Dong had displayed right now was enough to make many of the experts below the divine king fear him. This person doesn't seem like any of the people below the divine king. Whether it's his name or his characteristics, they're all extremely unfamiliar. Looks like this person called Ming Dong hasn't tried to challenge the divine king. Some of the experts below the divine king all sighed emotionally inside. Let's go. This person is very powerful, and our souls have been heavily injured. We're not his opponent at all, Bai Yi said to Gong Zheng secretly in the crowd. His expression was very ugly. Gong Zheng's face was sunken as well. He did not dare to look at Ming Dong, as he was afraid that the person on the moon's full peak would sense his presence from his gaze. Bai Yi and Gong Zheng retreated carefully, following the crowd and leaving the moon's full peak. The 2 of them had disguised themselves when they came, so they did not have to worry about being recognized. In another direction of the crowd, a woman in a white dress with a veil over her face stood there gracefully. She also stared at Ming Dong, who stood on the moon's full peak, solemnly. Your Highness, this person is very powerful. He's probably qualified to be one of the 100 divine kings, full peak. For your safety, I suggest that you leave the Tsang Poseidon Palace. Around a dozen divine kings gathered around the woman, protecting her like guards. One of the divine king's guards spoke to the woman cautiously. The woman was the princess of an ancient empire with a long history and deep heritage. She was also one of the 8 divine kings who had attacked Jianshan. In another direction, a woman also stood in the crowd in an extremely low-key manner. She wore a lot on her head, so no one could see her face. This woman was also one of the 8 people. She was a proud daughter of the heavens from a large family. However, at this moment, her pretty face that was hidden under the lot was similarly filled with seriousness. Chapter 2163. After killing the 2 supreme divine kings, Ming Dong stood on the moon's view peak and increased the bounty in front of all the divine kings. Then he left the moon's view peak with the 5 divine generals with the 2 heads in hand. Even though god artifacts were very precious, where every single one of them was priceless or even priceless, Ming Dong's revenge for Jianshan was clearly more important than anything else. He wanted to find the remaining people as soon as possible, even if he had to pay a huge price. Many of the 8 divine kings who had attacked Jianshan had secretly come here during the battle on the moon's view peak. However, they were all very cautious, disguising themselves and hiding their presences. They blended into the crowd, so no one was able to recognize them. The divine kings gathered around the moon's view peak dispersed very quickly, returning the moon's view peak to its previous peace. All that remained was a puddle of divine king's blood, as if it was silently describing the tragedy from before. After this, Ming Dong's name spread through the Tsang Poseidon Palace. Many of the divine kings in the Tsang Poseidon Palace remembered that a supreme prodigy who was not a divine king but possessed the strength of a divine king had appeared in the Tsang Poseidon Palace. As Ming Dong became more and more famous, more and more people began to pay attention to his astronomical bounty. They began to take him seriously. After all, although the astronomical bounty had spread like wildfire before, and basically everyone knew about it, not many people actually took it seriously. They all treated it as a joke. However, now that Ming Dong had made a name for himself, all of this would change. He had used his great strength to win absolute trust. After all, as a divine king, every single one of them was a proud and lofty existence. Their reputation was more important than anything else. People like that would naturally keep their word. They would never ruin their reputation. For a moment, more and more people searched for the remaining 6 divine kings who had attacked Jianshan in the Tsang Poseidon Palace. As a matter of fact, The divine kings who knew Mingdong was related to the heavenly palace of Bixing treated this as their top priority. They wanted to use this opportunity to befriend Mingdong so that they could establish a connection with the heavenly palace of Bixing. Mingdong returned to the boundless world of volcanoes on the 8th floor of the Tsang Poseidon Palace with the two divine kings' heads. He hovered several dozen meters in the air as he stared at the churning magma below him deeply. His face was filled with loneliness and sorrow. Jianqin, I've already found 2 of the 8 divine kings. Do you see them? I've come with their heads to pay my respects to you. I'll use their blood and souls to pay tribute to your reincarnation, Mingdong murmured softly. His heart was heavy as he was filled with sorrow. Afterwards, he relaxed his grip on the 2 heads. The 2 divine kings' heads continued to tumble down from the sky. No, don't. Let me go. Let me go. My clan will definitely be grateful to you. If you really do kill me, my master will never spare me. It's not just you. Even the organization behind you will have to bear the wrath of my master. My master is a Grand Prime. You better think it through. If you let me go right now, I can let bygones be bygones. The souls of the 2 divine kings were still present, but they had been sealed in their heads by Mingdong, so they could not escape. Seeing how they were getting closer and closer to the magma, they both became flustered. They roared out furiously and even directly threatened Mingdong. Mingdong's face did not change at all. Even the 5 divine generals were the same. Even when Mingdong mentioned a Grand Prime, they still did not take him seriously. No, don't. I am the disciple of the ancestral emperor of the God's Grace Empire of the Hinyu Plain, Guli. If anyone saves me, I will ask my master to take action and grant them a wish. One of the divine kings sent out a mental message, and it rang out into the distance. At this moment of life and death, he cast aside all his pride and dignity. All he wanted to do was think of a way to survive. There were still many divine kings collecting fire divine crystals on the 8th floor. When they heard Gu Li's mental message, they were all stunned before becoming zealous. They were not unfamiliar with the God's Grace Empire. It was one of the 2 eternal empires on the Hinyu Plain. It stood at the apex of the plain and was extremely powerful. The ancestral emperors of the eternal empires were all Grand Primes. People like them were existences who stood at the apex of the pyramid. They were supreme existences that looked down on all. They were extremely extraordinary. If they could make a wish from such a supreme figure, it would definitely be a heaven-defying opportunity that could change their fates. It was something that could only be chanced upon. For a moment, many divine kings on the 8th floor were tempted. They all gathered over, but when they saw the cold Mingdong and the 5 divine generals, they all became hesitant. They did not dare to take action to save Guli. They did not lose their heads over this. They all thought of the same thing. This person was even bold enough to kill the disciple of a Grand Prime without any fear. So how could his background be weak? What are you standing around for? Hurry up and take action. Guli panicked. He bellowed out, but no one actually took action. In the end, Guli could only reluctantly let his soul fall into the lava with his head sealed. He was swallowed by the scorching lava below. All the divine kings in the surroundings were shocked when they saw this. That was the disciple of the ancestral emperor of the God's Grace Empire. Yet he had died just like that. The God's Grace Empire was on the Hinyu Plain. It was not far away from the Poseidon Palace. Was this young man not afraid that the ancestral emperor of the God's Grace Empire would block the entrance to the Poseidon Palace? However, the divine kings seemed to realize something soon afterwards. Their faces all changed, and they immediately left as quickly as they could, vanishing in the blink of an eye. They did not go to the Moon's View Peak, so they naturally had no idea what had happened there. They were afraid that Mingdong would suddenly silence them. Mingdong did not care about the divine kings. His gaze remained fixed on the lava below. His eyes were gloomy, and he was in low spirits. He seemed rather dejected. He remained there for an entire hour. Only after confirming that the 2 heads were dead did he leave with the 5 divine generals to continue searching for the remaining 6 people. At this moment, at the bottom of the magma, a man in golden silk armor endured the terrifying heat of the magma. He held a net that was also woven from golden silk. He used the net to drag a large pile of fire divine crystals as he flew towards a small, golden tower nearby. However, just as he was about to enter the small golden tower, his body suddenly froze. He stared up and saw 2 half-melted heads slowly sinking down above him. The person cried out in surprise. With a wave of his hand, he caught the 2 heads. Without any hesitation, he entered the tower with a flash. He was none other than Jianqin, who everyone believed to be dead. The fire divine crystals had already piled up into a small hill within the Anita Tower. There were so many that they were uncountable. They were like a pile of useless rocks that had been casually tossed around. Jianqin entered the Anita Tower and casually tossed over a pile of fire divine crystals he had just collected, causing the mountain of fire divine crystals to grow slightly larger. Afterwards, he stared at the 2 heads in his hand. These 2 heads are somewhat familiar. It's as if I've seen them before. Jianqin studied the 2 heads. Although they were completely unrecognizable, they possessed a familiar presence. Chapter 2164. I must have seen the owners of these 2 heads when they were alive, but I don't have a particularly deep impression of them. Coupled with the fact that most of the heads have been melted by the lava, not only am I unable to recognize them, but I don't even know if they were a man or a woman when they were alive. Jianqin held the 2 heads in his hand as he frowned slightly. The souls in the 2 heads had already dispersed, and a large amount of lava had poured in. Scorching lava constantly flowed out of the heads, covering Jianqin's hand. A while later, Jianqin's eyes suddenly narrowed. He finally remembered who the owners of the 2 heads were. Jianqin had never personally seen the faces of the 8 divine kings who had attacked him before, because they all shone with the light of laws. However, he had clashed with them before, so he could clearly remember their presences. At that moment, the remnant auras of the 2 heads in his hands were exactly the same as those of the 2 people he was holding. I never thought that 2 of them would actually die. I had planned on personally seeking revenge, but they died to the hands of someone else first. Jianqin sighed gently as his face was filled with mixed feelings. With a flash, Kei suddenly appeared before Jianqin. He stared at the 2 heads in Jianqin's hand that had already changed beyond recognition and said, 2 divine kings have died in a single stroke. It looks like the battle in the Tsang Poseidon Palace is becoming more and more intense. Even the supreme divine king who sits on the divine king's throne is gradually losing his advantage. Jianqin nodded in agreement. The Tsang Poseidon Palace is no longer the same as before. The appearance of the Tsang Poseidon Palace means that something huge is about to happen. It's impossible to hide this news, so it should have spread to the outside world long ago. If I've guessed correctly, the large clans and organizations of the Saints' world should have sent quite a few divine king over gods into Poseidon Palace. There should be a few extremely powerful supreme over gods among them. Kea became extremely solemn as well. If the Azure Poseidon Palace really does send more experts, it will only be more disadvantageous for us unless we remain in the lava. Otherwise, with Lil Man's uniqueness, I'm afraid that as soon as we appear, we will become the target of public criticism. Jianqin, what do you plan to do next? Jianqin pondered deeply for a short moment and said, there's still some time before Azure Poseidon Palace closes. I'll seize this period of time to gather some divine flame crystals, and then I'll study what happened to Lil Man. After that, I'll decide what to do in the end. Time passed silently. In the blink of an eye, a few days had already passed since Ming Dong killed the 2 supreme divine king over gods. During this time, Ming Dong constantly searched for the whereabouts of the other 6 people. The astronomical bounty he offered had already spread across the entire Azure Poseidon Palace. The temptation of a god artifact made countless people envious. However, although Ming Dong's reckless display of his wealth had encouraged the divine king over gods in the Azure Poseidon Palace to search for the other 6 people, it had also drawn over a few people who wanted to kill him for his treasures. As a result, various assassinations and traps were set up to find Ming Dong in an attempt to kill him and steal his treasures. However, without any exception, all the people who set their sights on Ming Dong never returned. Not only did they fail to take anything from Ming Dong, but they even established Ming Dong's name instead, making Ming Dong even more renowned in the Azure Poseidon Palace. Over the past few days, Ming Dong had obtained all the information on the other 6 people and learnt of their origins. However, due to the battle on the Moon's View Peak, the 6 of them had all hidden themselves after witnessing Ming Dong's strength. As a result, Ming Dong failed to find any traces of them even after several days. The 6 of them sure have hidden themselves well. I can't keep searching like this. However, now that I know their identities, it'll be almost impossible for them to escape from me. Ming Dong's face sank. Killing intent surged as he coldly called out to the 5 divine generals, "Protect me! I'm going to use fate techniques to find them." The faces of the 5 divine generals all changed when they heard that. One of them immediately said with a heavy voice, "You can't, Ninth Majesty. Fate techniques are forbidden. If you don't have the corresponding strength, you'll be injured by the power of the laws. It'll be very difficult to recover from that. The price is too great." Fate techniques had been created by Ming Dong's master. Once the technique was used, he could peer into the heavenly secrets and mysteries of the laws, as well as see his own reincarnation and the fates of all living beings. It was extremely wondrous and profound. With Ming Dong's strength, although he could not peer into the heavenly secrets and mysteries of the laws, nor could he see his own reincarnation and the fates of all living beings, it was not too difficult for him to use the information he possessed to look through the various layers of karma and find the traces of a few people within a certain range. As long as I can avenge my brother. So what if I'm injured by the power of the laws? Ming Dong's voice was extremely firm. It was filled with an unquestionable sense of dominance. Furthermore, he was a man of his word. Without the slightest hesitation, he immediately began to use his fate technique. At the same time, the news that the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace had awakened and that the Tsang Poseidon Palace was about to accept a new master spread through the Tsang Poseidon Palace, causing a great uproar. For a time, many cultivators of various levels of cultivation from various places began to move about the Tsang Poseidon Palace. They began a carpet search, searching for the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace. The 12th floor of the Tsang Poseidon Palace was no longer a forbidden ground in the eyes of the regular divine kings. Many divine kings surged into the 12th floor. They searched every inch of the floor with burning desire. They did not miss a single spot. The Tsang Poseidon Palace was a high-quality god artifact in the first place, and it contained an unimaginable amount of resources. All of them knew that as long as they could obtain the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace and become the master of this place, they would possess everything here. However, even though they had turned the Tsang Poseidon Palace upside down, they did not find a single trace of the artifact spirit. At this moment, a graceful woman in a white dress sat on a boulder on the 11th floor of the Tsang Poseidon Palace. She wore a veil over her face. Although her appearance could not be seen, it was possible to tell that she definitely possessed extraordinary beauty from her large, beautiful eyes. Over a dozen divine king guards stood behind the woman, guarding the place loyally as they observed the surroundings at all times. If the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace doesn't appear, finding it will be as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Your Highness, should we continue searching? A guard asked politely. Chapter 2165. What? That girl is the person chosen by the artifact spirit? Doesn't that mean? It said that the girl is only at the human realm. Your Highness, that's impossible. The guards behind her all spoke in surprise. All of them found it hard to believe. I find this very hard to believe as well. However, looking at history, out of the countless cultivators who have entered the Tsang Poseidon Palace, which one of them has been protected by the world of the Tsang Poseidon Palace? No. In the long history of the Tsang Poseidon Palace, something like this has never happened in the Tsang Poseidon Palace, the woman said softly. She looked at the world of the Tsang Poseidon Palace with mixed feelings. However, something so unbelievable has happened right now. Moreover, it happened when the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace has awakened. What does that mean? It means that the reason why the girl is protected by the world of the Tsang Poseidon Palace is because of the help of the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace. As a result, I can conclude that the girl is the person chosen by the artifact spirit. The guards behind the woman looked at each other with that. They all believed that the princess analysis was very reasonable, but at the same time they felt very confused. They did not understand why the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace would choose a girl with such low cultivation. But the girl has already fallen into the lava. She hasn't appeared again, a guard asked carefully. The princess' eyes became deep. She said, "Don't forget that the girl is protected by the world. As long as the power that surpasses the Tsang Poseidon Palace doesn't appear, she'll be fine. As a result, although the lava is terrifying, it can't harm the girl at all. Let's go to the 8th floor and see if we can find the girl. Do you think you can still leave?" Princess Yun Xiaoyan of the Thousand Lotus Empire. At this moment, an icy cold voice rang out from nearby. The voice was filled with chilling, killing intent, causing the temperature of the surroundings to abruptly plummet. "Who is it?" Princess Yun Xiaoyan's face changed. She suddenly turned around and looked behind her. Her beautiful face hidden under the veil immediately became extremely stern. With her strength, she actually failed to sense the person approaching her at all. 1,000 meters away, the space there twisted, and 6 figures silently appeared in the empty space. They all concealed themselves and used secret techniques to conceal themselves. They approached the place silently, where even the supreme God King on the God King's throne, Yun Xiaoyan, failed to sense them at all. Yun Xiaoyan's eyes suddenly narrowed when she saw the person who had arrived. However, her expression did not change as she said, "Young Master Ming, may I know what you meant by what you said earlier?" The 6 people were Ming Dong and the 5 divine generals. However, at this moment, Ming Dong's face was extremely pale. He seemed rather weak, as if he had been heavily injured. He had paid a very great price to use destiny techniques. He had been injured by the power of laws, so even after ingesting a god-tier healing pill, it would be very difficult for him to recover in a short amount of time. "Yun Xiaoyan, you've come because you know why I've come. Do you want to deny taking part in the attack on Jianqin?" Ming Dong stood in the air. His tone was ice-cold, without the slightest emotion. An aura as vast as the ocean radiated from his body in all directions. Yun Xiaoyan giggled and pulled down the veil on her face, revealing a face that was enough to mesmerize all living things. She was truly as beautiful as a goddess, elegant and refined. Young Master Ming Shi is skilled. I've already hidden myself so well, and even the guards by my side have disguised themselves. I thought I could fool everyone in the Tsang Poseidon Palace, but I never thought that I would still be unable to escape young Master Ming's eyes in the end. Yun Xiaoyan giggled as she stared at Ming Dong with her large eyes. "Humph! No matter how you hide yourself or what methods you have, anyone who has taken part in the attack on Jianqin will die in the end. Even if you leave the Tsang Poseidon Palace, I'll hunt you down until the end. I won't let a single one of you go," Ming Dong said coldly. His expression did not change at all. "Young Master Ming, I may have taken part in the attack on Jianqin, but I did not use my full strength. Is young Master Ming really so cold-hearted that you don't know how to treat a woman well and want to cut me down with your sword?" Yun Xiaoyan asked. She seemed to have been wronged, making her seem pitiful. Her demeanor, coupled with her peerless beauty, truly possessed an extremely strong allure. In the entire world, it was likely that not many men would be ruthless enough to do such a thing to her, to do such a ruthless thing to a flower. Die. Ming Dong's face turned cold. He did not waver at all. With a jolt of his sword, he charged at Yun Xiaoyan murderously with the power of the laws of destruction. Protect the princess! Yun Xiaoyan's guards all called out as they charged at Ming Dong fearlessly. However, although there were late Divine King experts among the guards, they were just regular Divine Kings. The difference between them and the experts on the Divine King's throne was just too great. Ming Dong's eyes were cold as killing intent surged. The power of the laws of destruction on his sword transformed into a furious dragon, instantly enveloping the 3 Divine Kings. The 3 Divine Kings were unable to put up any resistance at all. They were pulverized by the terrifying power of destruction in a single instance, chopped to pieces. Back off! Yun Xiaoyan's face was ugly. She called out and struck out with her full strength. She wielded her sword, and with the power of the laws of the sword, she shot out a streak of light that was several hundred meters long as she engaged in an intense battle with Ming Dong. Boom! The 2 of them clashed, erupting with deafening booms. The laws of destruction and the laws of the sword intertwined, engaging in the most intense clash in the sky. Terrifying ripples of energy turned into storms that wreaked havoc in the surroundings, causing the world to collapse and the sun to dim. You sure are vicious! Yun Xiaoyan retreated in the air. She was no longer as graceful as before. Her hair was disheveled, and she was in a horrible shape. Her snow-white clothes were covered in specks of blood. Ming Dong was very powerful. Not only had he grasped various powerful battle skills and secret techniques, but he had also mastered the laws of destruction to perfection. Yun Xiaoyan had already lost the upper hand in their brief clash. She was not Ming Dong's opponent at all. Heavens collapse! Suddenly Ming Dong bellowed out. The laws of destruction condensed in his hand wildly, turning into a huge hand that blotted out the sky. With a terrifying might that could cause the world to pale, he slammed it towards Yun Xiaoyan mercilessly. Chapter 2166. As she said that, an extremely powerful pulse of energy radiated from Yun Xiaoyan. She was stern as she formed a seal with one hand before suddenly extending a finger at the sky. As she extended her finger, a powerful sword chi immediately shot out. It shone with a demonic, blood-red light, shooting into the sky with an unstoppable force. After using the blood-red sword chi, Yun Xiaoyan's face paled as well. The sword chi she had used was an extremely powerful secret technique. It required her to burn her essence, blood, to activate it, and she would pay quite a price every time she used it. As a result, the sword chi barely possessed the power of a god-tier battle skill. Ming Dong could not help but sneer disdainfully when he saw that. He suddenly clenched his hand, and the huge hand he had conjured with the god-tier battle skill clenched tightly as well. It grabbed Yun Xiaoyan's sword chi and crushed it to pieces. Spurt! Immediately, Yun Xiaoyan felt like her heart had been crushed. Blood spurted from her mouth as her pale face became even paler. Although the blood-red sword chi that she had used a secret technique to cast through burning her essence blood was powerful enough to make it a god-tier battle skill, it was still just barely. Compared to Ming Dong's true god-tier battle skill, it was obviously a huge chasm. However, after crushing Yun Xiaoyan's blood-red sword chi, the huge hand did not slow down at all. It enveloped Yun Xiaoyan with a tremendous destructive force and slammed into the ground heavily. With a great boom, the ground shook. The palm strike was extremely powerful, leaving a deep imprint in the ground. And this was the destructive power within the Azure Poseidon Palace, a high-quality god artifact. If it were outside, no one doubted the power of Ming Dong's palm strike at all. It was enough to shatter a small planet easily. Any matter in the Saints' world could not be compared to the Tianyuan continent. Ming Dong's palm strike was enough to pulverize a small planet in the Saints' world, which was more than enough to demonstrate how shocking it was. Yun Xiaoyan did not die. At that moment, her hair was disheveled and she was in a sorry state. She simply looked like a beggar. Her exceptional appearance was also frighteningly pale. She struggled to her feet. Her white dress had already been reduced to ashes, and a set of dimly lit top-grade Saint artifact armor that was riddled with cracks covered her body, preventing her body from being exposed. Young Master Ming, you're really ruthless. You don't know how to be tender and protective of the fairer sex. Could it be that you're determined to kill me today? Yun Xiaoyan stared deeply at Ming Dong, who was hovering in the air like a merciless god of slaughter. She seemed to want to imprint his face deeply in her mind. That's right, Ming Dong said coldly. He stepped through the air with his sword in hand, approaching Yun Xiaoyan step by step. Ha ha ha! Since young Master Ming doesn't want to spare me, I'll do as you wish. However, I won't die to young Master Ming's hands. Yun Xiaoyan giggled. In the end, she glanced at Ming Dong deeply with mixed feelings. Afterward, she extended a finger towards her forehead and shattered her soul. She passed away, the princess of the 1,000 Lotus Empire, a supreme beauty who was a descendant of the Divine King, had died just like that. Your Highness, Yun Xiaoyan's suicide caused the dozen or so guards to be filled with grief and grief. Ming Dong paused slightly as well. He stared at the lifeless Yun Xiaoyan in surprise and fell silent. A while later, Ming Dong slowly made his way over to Yun Xiaoyan's corpse. Ignoring the forceful objections of the guards, he crouched down in front of Yun Xiaoyan's corpse and carefully examined it. Only after confirming that Yun Xiaoyan was dead did he stand up. With his back to the guards in front of Yun Xiaoyan, he said, "Your princess is a respectable person. She's also the first woman that I, Ming Dong, have taken notice of. As a result, I won't be taking her head away. You can leave with her corpse." With that, Ming Dong left with the 5 divine generals. Now, 3 out of the 8 divine king that had attacked Jianqin before were dead. However, Ming Dong had already grasped the locations of the remaining 5 after using the art of destiny. As Ming Dong focused on taking revenge for Jianqin, a new storm was brewing in the cerulean Poseidon Palace. Xiao Man, who had fallen into the lava with Jianqin's in a tower under the protection of the world, had become the focus of everyone's attention in the cerulean Poseidon Palace. Yun Xiaoyan was not the only one who guessed that Xiao Man was extremely likely to be chosen by the artifact spirit of the cerulean Poseidon Palace. Basically, after learning that Xiao Man was protected by the power of the cerulean Poseidon Palace, everyone believed that it was extremely likely for Xiao Man to have some secret connection with the cerulean Poseidon Palace. As a matter of fact, some people even claimed that the changes in the cerulean Poseidon Palace were extremely likely to be caused by Xiao Man several million years ago. A supreme expert pointed out that the cerulean Poseidon Palace would undergo a great change when the cerulean moon appears. However, no one was able to predict what the change would be, whether it would be good or bad. As a result, it has always remained a mystery. But looking at it now, the great change is extremely likely to be the awakening of the artifact spirit of the cerulean Poseidon Palace. The cerulean Poseidon Palace is about to undergo a master recognition ceremony. This matter probably isn't as simple as it seems on the surface. If it's just the cerulean Poseidon Palace choosing a new master, it can't be described as a great change. We have to be careful from now on. Something that can be described as a great change by a supreme expert is no small matter. Many divine kings discussed the matter. There were also a few divine kings who thought of a rumor that had been passed down for over 3 million years. Suddenly, they realized that the trip to the cerulean Poseidon Palace was probably not as simple as they had imagined it to be. They all became cautious. Have you heard? Ming Dong, who offered an astronomical bounty, has already personally killed 4 supreme divine kings. After the battle on the Moon's View Peak, Princess Yun Xiaoyan of the 1,000 Lotus Empire and the beloved daughter of the Kangming clan, Kangming Fian, were killed one after another. Their souls were wiped out. Before long, another shocking piece of news appeared, attracting everyone's attention. Ming Dong is just too crazy. He's even bold enough to kill the beloved daughter of the Kangming clan. The Kangming clan used to be a peak clan that shook up the Saints' world. They were no weaker than the Taoist sect of Neptunia in the past. Although they've declined now, their heritage is still very deep. They're not to be trifled with. What kind of background do you think Ming Dong has? He's actually offended so many peak organizations just for the sake of avenging the dead. Fortunately, I didn't take part in the attack against Jianshan back then. Otherwise, I probably would have been reduced to a corpse by now. As soon as Ming Dong was mentioned, quite a few God Kings immediately became interested and joined in the discussion.